Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL Split number 1, week number 2 overview and analysis video. This is the big one. This is the longest week of Split number 1 here for the LPL. We've got a ton to cover. It's kind of the super week. There are multiple 3-series days and just a lot to learn. We mostly spent time on Group Ascend, obviously, in week number 1 with, that being the group with the most amount of teams. They just kind of front-loaded, I think, a lot of that schedule, but we get a lot more information and just general knowledge on a lot of the other teams. Group Perseverance, Group Nirvana get a lot more action, and of course Group Ascend still playing quite a bit. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, of course, let me know down in the comments section below as per usual. Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down there. Quick announcement at the start of today, as I almost always do here. If you are a fan of the LPL and you don't know already, I am color commentating for LPL English right now across this split and next split as well. And if you're interested in maybe seeing me cast live or just tuning into these LPL games that we're talking about in today's video live, go ahead and check out LPL English. The link to that is in the description. I cast a couple of games during this week. I will denote that as we go throughout the rest of this video with a little asterisk next to the group name. And then I am going to be casting a couple of times over the next week or so. January 28th, I will have the 2 series on the back end there, OMG, LNG, and NIP EDG. Then February 1st, I will take the first series, and February 5th, I will also be on for the first series. So if you are interested in seeing me cast live, definitely check out LPL English. I'll be on all split long, playoffs as well, then next split, all the regular stuff. Definitely check it out. YouTube and Twitch are, of course, as I said, in the description. But that is the preamble out of the way. Let's go ahead and get into the analysis. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. The only way to start is to start with series number 1, with day number 1, and this was one of the series I got to cast over the course of this week, so I might take a little bit less time. If you want full thoughts on the series that I do end up casting, definitely go check out the VODs. Obviously, I'll be giving my thoughts throughout the entirety of these games, and that's going to be a lot more in depth than anything I can give in this video. But the series we kicked off our week with was Thunder Talk Gaming taking on Team WE in Group Perseverance, and WE is going to pick up the 2-0 victory. WE really looked good at the start of the split. We'll talk about them a lot more throughout this video, but this was their 2-0 start, and things were really clicking for them. It really felt like they were maybe not going to have the same kind of repeat as they did in 2025 after Demacia Cup, after they just were so bad at that tournament. They couldn't pick up a win against basically anybody, and they looked completely lost. And even in their first series win over EDG, which was a massive victory that kind of solidified them as the team to beat in this group, so to speak, Monkey wasn't playing particularly well. I think Cube has really struggled on the top side to generate pressure. Yao Yao, I think, has had some up and down moments, but it's been the carry duo here for WE that continues to kind of push them forward, and you get one great game out of Monkey in the jungle, and really a game and a half, I'll say, on the Wukong. You had some ups and downs in game number 2, I should say, of this series, but overall, he was, solid enough, and we'll talk about that. But Karis and About looking so good for WE right now, just really kind of pushed them over the edge. For Thunder Talk, this was their debut on the split. We got to see some of the BLGJ players that I had been hyping up, Haru in particular, get some first action here in the LPL, and it was both good and bad for him as a debut, which I'm excited to go into. Monkey, for me, is going to get player of the series, which feels like a very weird handout here with Karis playing so well and really being able to carry game number 2 on the rise, but I think they don't win game number 1 without his Trundle play, without Monkey's Trundle play, I should say. I really do think he was that relevant and important into that game, and I kind of talked about that on the cast, but I really wanted to make that point after going back and rewatching this series for this video, that I think he was really important on the Trundle. I think the Wukong game was, there were up and downs. Like, he's going to get caught out. His consistency is just not really there right now. He's a super aggressive player, and he's going to get punished for that in quite a few instances. But overall, I think he made some really nice engages, and I think he played off the rest of the team well. I think he was the most important player for WE on the Rift here today, even if Karis probably had more pop-off moments because he had more opportunities to do so. The thing that really kind of pushed me away from giving Karis player of the series is just the fact that he lost lane in both games. And I understand it's not always the easiest laning phase in either of these 2 games, but the Sylas ended up being huge in the back end, and so did the Rise. If he had an earlier lead and didn't have to try and play these team fights a little bit more consistently, then I think things would have been a little bit easier for WE. But that just kind of goes into what WE's identity clearly is right now. This team has won 4 games throughout this split, and all of them have been comebacks. They have not been able to win in the early game at all so far in 2026, and that carries carried through from Demacia Cup. If there is a concern, it's that their early games are super inconsistent and very reliant on Monkey being aggressive. Game 1 was probably the best early game they've had, and it's because he was level 3, level 4 ganking on the Trundle and just trying to take over in what was ultimately like a mega counterpick matchup in game number 1, a really tough draft for ThunderTalk to play out. WE did a good job to capitalize on that. So Monkey for me is player of the series because of that early aggression in game 1, the ability to really generate that lead and be really important in the back end of those team fights as well. He was easily player of the game in game number 1 for me, and then I think he was more valuable than he maybe gets credit for on the Wukong. Karis continues to be the best performing player on this team though throughout this split. As long as he can start winning lane a bit more consistently, things are going to look better for him. I think I've been really impressed by I think him and Yao Yao have really nice chemistry together. Yao Yao's not really getting a lot of praise right now, but I think he's making a lot of good plays for this team. This bot lane has genuinely been solid, and Cube is one of the worst performing top laners in the league right now. It just doesn't really matter because the rest of the map is doing fine. So WE with a really nice start despite the fact that their early games are so bad. And ThunderTalk, there is a lot of good to take away from this kind of performance. I think Haru showed you why I was so high on him coming into the year and why he was such a big prospect coming out of BLGJ. The aggressiveness and the overall mechanics are just phenomenal. The ability to generate a lead is really special with this guy, and I think in the right circumstance with the right teammates around him, he can be a really big threat at the LPL level. The problems though also came through because he was just not ready to be making big decisions and to be the win condition for ThunderTalk in the late game. He was that in game number 1 on the Azir, and he makes a couple of missteps, and all of a sudden the game is over. In game number 2, he makes 2 massive mistakes on the Taliyah, overstepping around a Baron that they had full control over, that ThunderTalk, if they pick it up and if they're able to kind of scale the game out from there, they just kind of win the game, and they end up pushing this to a game number 3 because he was dominating on the Taliyah. He ends up stepping too far forward, dying. They can no longer take Baron, and, the rest of the game happens, and then, of course, the teleport down onto the bottom side. It's super unfortunate that ended up playing out, but I think still there's too much positive to take away from Haru's performance for me to be upset. These are rookie mistakes that I think he will be able to, work through, and this team's not in Group Nirvana. They're not in threat to not be in split number 2, right? Like, they're going to be playing in split 2. I think Haru is somebody that I'm really excited to commit to. Keshi, I think, had some nice moments despite his KDA. Junhao, for me, is going to get dud of the series. There was a pretty big jungle gap in terms of just raw, I guess, plays on the map. I don't know how impact, is that probably the word that I should be using here? Monkey was so active and was constantly making plays, and every time Junhao was trying to do anything, it felt like he was really far behind. I just do not think he played well here today. I do think the jungle gap was quite large. Ryan 3 and Feather were meh. Ryan in particular is just not really that inspiring, and Feather did not look good in this series, so we'll see where ThunderTalk goes from here. They're probably the weakest team in Group Perseverance, as we predicted, but WE is obviously a team that is trying to get back into Group Ascent. They look like they're good enough right now, but if they can really clean up the edges, if Monkey in particular can, even get back to 80% of what he was last year, because he's not that right now, this team could genuinely be kind of scary and near the top of the standings. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and we go back up to Group Ascend for a matchup between Top Esports and Weibo Gaming, where Top Esports are going to pick up the victory. This is massive. This team has not looked very good so far at the start of this split. We all kind of knew that they were going to need some time to get comfortable and to get going, but picking up a win over a Weibo Gaming team that I think actually looked okay in week number 1 is a really nice pickup. I think the players that have continued to look good for Weibo, for the most part, continued to look good. It's really just Elk. I think Zeka had a great week 1. He did not play well here in this series, which we will talk about, but Top Esports finally being able to get into the win column and doing it against a team that, isn't horrible. I think Weibo definitely has a lot going for them. I think is really, really nice to see. There was a lot to take away in terms of positives from the way this team played, specifically the fact that I think Cream was player of the series. I don't think it was really all that up for debate for me. Nayo ends up getting it on broadcast. I'm entirely surprised that he got it, not because I think he was terrible, but just because I don't think he played all that well in game number 2, and while he did have a pretty big impact specifically on the Poppy in game 1 and the Vi, I guess really in game number 3, maybe even the Vi game was a bit better, Cream was really the one that was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of generating that tempo and pressure in the mid lane. His Azir game in game number 1 was fantastic. Xiaohu was actually playing fine in that game. He made some massive positioning mistakes at the end, which we'll talk about. Xiaohu's obviously not having a good start to this split. It might be, time for major concern. We've had minor concern for 3.5 years with this guy, but I think major concern is definitely on the way with someone like Xiaohu, as we'll talk about a bit later. But the Ahri game in game 3 was also fantastic, and he completely abused Xiaohu on that Aurora in that matchup. Cream was really excellent excellent in this performance. And I think people just forget about these kinds of games when they analyze Cream. Again, it's the same thing that I talk about when, I bring up the fact that Cream and Shanks to me are very similar and basically the same in terms of, what kind of player they are in the LPL. I think people look at Shanks' good games or the fact that he's kind of protected by a player like Tarzan and just kind of say that he's an incredibly great mid laner when I don't always think he's generating his resources on his own. And Cream, for the most part, doesn't always have that same kind of assistance and is much more inconsistent because of it, but he still wins just as hard as any other mid laner in the league. Mid's just not a super consistent position right now. It's why a lot of the, top mid laners are kind of vying for that number 2 spot. I really do think it's wide open, and Cream had a fantastic series here to keep himself in that conversation. I think the rest of the team was fine. Nio was really solid in terms of his playmaking and his creation. He was really aggressive in this series, which I was excited to see, but mostly he was just playing off of Cream's advantages, and the advantages he did generate for himself were mostly on things like Vi, Ahri that, basically have inbuilt advantages for themselves. 369 had some great laning phases, especially in that third game where he completely destroyed Zahem. I am happy to talk about that. Jiachi had his best series by far as a member of Top Esports here. Elk was phenomenal on the other side of the map here, but it just didn't really matter. Feng Yue had a couple of nice engage moments, but overall wasn't like the most important player. This really was a middle and top of the map kind of gap from Top Esports, and Cream, I think, really was the facilitator of that. I think he was super important towards this TES win, and he's going to continue to be very important towards their series in the future. For Weibo, on the other side, it's really unlucky that I think Zika, one of the players that was really good for them in week number 1, genuinely looked like he could, elevate this team and kind of bounce back from what was a terrible situation last year on LNG, was just bad in this series. I think the Cassante game is fine in game number 1, not horrible. The Mbessa game's good in game 2. Everybody was basically good in game number 2, but that Zahem, I mean, that champion is super broken right now, can do a ton of things in solid matchups, and you just pick him into a situation where you should be able to survive the early laning phase and take over late, and he is awful. I mean, he's completely and utterly useless in this game. I've not seen this champion be so completely unplayable throughout the year up until now, like in multiple different regions, whether it be Europe, whether it be Korea, it hasn't really mattered. This champion has looked strong everywhere it's been played, and Zika did not make it look good or strong in this one. He made it look incredibly weak. So for me, that is dud of the series worthy. If you want to give it to Xiaohu because he was just as bad, quite frankly, in game number 3, I think that that's fine. I think Xiaohu had a harder game to play than Zika did, which is why I gave it to Zika, but Xiaohu continues to not play well so far in 2026. I know we have Scout on the mind from last year on JDG where everything just kind of went downhill and things look really bad for a majority of the year. Xiaohu goes through these stretches where he's just terrible as a player. He basically has always had these, especially since he left RNG. It's never really been like, oh, Xiaohu's super consistent and is just going to be a good mid laner. It's why he's always been hovering around the 5th to 6th best mark, but he'll have series every once in a while where he ends up carrying and dominating against some really good teams, and I think you're just hopeful that you can get that out of him. I think his Rise game was really good in game number 2. I think he played the laning phase well on the Syndra. I just don't think he played the late game very well on that champion, which is kind of the opposite of what he normally does. There are underlying metrics to say that he's going to be able to do a little bit better, but there are also statistics that will tell you that it's not looking all that good for him right now. If the solo laners are going to play like this is going to be one of the worst teams in Group Ascend. Poor Elk, man. There's just not much else to say. This guy is popping off. I cannot believe there is like a serious conversation for who the second best AD carry in the LPL is, and this is a bit of a side tangent. Like, Gala, I get it. Like, I'm low on Gala. I get that I don't have the same opinion as everybody. I don't understand how anyone thinks that Gala is better than Elk as a player. Like, it just doesn't cross my mind. Elk really is that fantastic as an ADC. It's not supposed to be a slight to Gala. He's playing great out the gate. He's been one of the biggest pieces for JDG. That bot lane looks fantastic, but Elk is like a different breed of mechanically talented. Like, he's probably the most mechanically talented AD carry in the world, just in terms of what he can do and the resources he can generate. He just doesn't have the team right now that can stay consistent around him. Weibo really needed to pick up this victory. They got a big one over IG last week, but they're not able to hold on to their momentum, and this is going to hurt them in the long run, but this was important for Top Esports. Remember, this is a team that's not just fighting to be competitive in Group Ascend, but they want to be top 6. Like, this is not a team that even wants to be close to the conversations around Team WE, and, we'll talk about some of the other teams later on in the week. An LNG team that I think looked really good at Demacia Cup. They don't want to be in those conversations. They want to be a tier above all of those teams, and these are the kinds of wins that will give you the confidence that they can do that. But that's going to bring us to our third series of day number 1. We have a super day here to kick off the week, and our third series is back down in Group Perseverance. It's LGD Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas, and NIP is going to pick up the 3-game win. Somehow, someway, Ninjas in Pyjamas is going to be able to win their first series of the year, and EDG is in full panic mode right now. There is nothing else left to say. If you were concerned before, you are doubly concerned now because it's off the rails. NIP was a team that I thought was going to be one of the worst in the entire league. They were my betting favorite to be the worst team in Group Perseverance by quite a lot, and here they are picking up a very big win at the start of their Group Perseverance run. Obviously, you know, that number 14 spot, or the team that I always criticize in the offseason, it's kind of cursed for me in particular. It's blessed for the team on this channel. Last year, that was WE, where I was complaining about their offseason. They go on to get top 4 in spring, be a Group Ascend team for the entirety of the year, and just look generally good. Ninjas in Pyjamas might be that version of that team this year, where they're just a lot better than we could have ever predicted. The pieces come together in a way that we could not have expected, because this is a nice win. For EDG, like, it is concerning. This team is starting 0-2, and that is a horrible place to be in a Group Perseverance that everybody thought they were going to be massive favorites in. Everyone thought they were going to be in Group Ascend by the end of split number 1, going into split number 2. That is looking very unlikely with the way this team is playing right now. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Care in the mid lane. The Aurelion Soul game, we can count that one out in game number 1. We don't have to worry too much about it. The Cassio, the Ari in games 2 and 3, they were much better, and they were really solid from Care. He is a big player towards Ninjas in Pyjamas' success over the course of this year, because you're looking at, you know, can he be that version of himself that looked so interesting back in 2023, I think it was. The last time when I was really going to bat for Care, it was either 23 or 24. That first real year on FPX that he was the starter, that was the year where I was like, oh man, they've got something here. I believe it was 2023, where it's like, oh man, he's an interesting player. There's a lot to build on, and it just feels like it's never been there again. There have been some playoff series where he's looked interesting, but there is an interesting player here. I think that is the thing that I want to say. There is something that you can pull out of Care, and I think FPX has already shown that they were an org that was not getting the most out of a lot of their players. If you can get a better version of Care, a lot more similar to what he was in 2023, then things become a lot more interesting for NIP, because I think Care looked good. I think Guan looked good here in the jungle, which I really did not expect. This was a guy who, like I said, was benched in the LCP last year for Detonation Focus Me, and now he's coming over to the LPL and, you know, going toe-to-toe at the very least with Xiaohao, who I think was good in his own right, the best player on EDG for sure in this series. But Guan, I think, was a great facilitator, and he looked very comfortable on these, you know, easy engaged champions. I think that's going to be an identity that we carry through with NIP throughout the rest of the year. Awesome looked great. Assume, whatever you want to call him. You know, obviously you can go either way. I think we're going with Awesome on LPL English, so I will call him that here as well. The Kaisa, the Misfortune, both of those games I think were really solid. I think the bullet times he found in game 3 off of some Zhuo engages were incredible. I think Zhuo's had a great start so far. Obviously, there's not much to talk about. This was their first series. Hoya was even fine on the top side, was better than ZDZ. That shouldn't really be all that surprising. ZDZ's not all that great, but NIP looked good. I mean, their first test was passed with flying colors. I think this team showed that they actually can get the best out of a couple of these players, and if players like Guan, Care, Awesome, and Zhuo like step up, even if Hoya steps up as well on the top side, and you're getting the best version of these players that we haven't seen in quite a while, there is something theoretically interesting here to pull out. But for EDG, I mean, it's complete disaster time, right? Like, how else do you even talk about this? I mean, losing to WE is one thing, but losing to this Ninjas in Pyjamas roster is just not acceptable. Like, you cannot be in this position, and it's mostly because their carry duo is just playing so bad right now. Angel is once again going to get dud of the series for me. He's been gapped in both of their series so far. First it was Karis, and now it's Care. Those are not two players that Angel should be losing to at all, let alone being gapped by in and out of lane. It just has not felt like he's been comfortable on the map. It's really weird to try and watch him play the game, because he's constantly making plays that I just don't think he would have made about a year ago. So I don't know. I think last year was solid from him. He really has not been able to recapture that form from around 2024, 2023, when he was on Ninjas in Pyjamas with Shadow. He's never really been able to get back to that length. You know, the OMG year, I think, was kind of a worrying sign of what could happen if he's just not in a great spot, because I don't think that was a particularly good year for Angel. But last year, I think we saw enough good traits to think that it could still be there. It's not shown up at all so far in 2026. Leave has also just been not good. On was not good for this team last year. You thought you were getting an upgrade here in terms of Leave coming back. He very erroneously got All-Pro in the winter split last year because the sample size was just so small. This guy is not a good AD carry. I have said this for a while on the channel. He has incredible mechanics, and he understands how to carry if he's in the perfect position, but you need to babysit this guy into oblivion, because he just makes mental errors all the time. Like, his positioning is maybe the worst of almost any major AD carry in the world. It really is that bad, and he continues to get punished for it, and he's making even more mistakes now on EDG than he did on NIP last year. You know, Palkia is obviously a good player and a good playmaker, but he's not a babysitter. He's somebody who wants to leave lane and be a lot more aggressive on things like Bard, as we saw in game number 1. When you have to babysit a player like Leaf, things get bad very quickly. This is already looking like very bad synergy in the bot lane between these two players, and Leaf is really suffering for it. ZDZ has completely collapsed back down to what he has been for most of his career, which is one of the worst top laners in the LPL, and Xiaohao's like, well, shit, now I'm on a bad team again. Like, how did we get here? I thought I had finally escaped purgatory and gotten onto something I could play around, and now he's once again the only player doing anything on EDG. It's a really bad look. They've started off terrible. They need to rebound quickly, and, you know, they might not even be a team that ends up getting top 2 in this group, which would be majorly disappointing, because NIP really does look that good. They look like a pretty big favorite to get top 2 in this group, at least after this win. Obviously, it's a long round robin. This was only their first series of the year. Maybe this was, you know, a shock, but we'll talk about them a bit more later on. There's a lot to like here with NIP. Then moving on to day number 2, and we kick off day number 2 with the Group Ascend matchup between Anyone's Legend and Weibo Gaming, where AL are going to pick up the 2-0 victory. This is very quickly becoming a top half of Group Ascend and bottom half of Group Ascend type of conversation that we are going to have. The 3 teams at the top of Group Ascend are fine, they're good. For the most part, they have a lot of upside and can really make some plays happen like AL did in this series. And then there's the bottom 3 in Group Ascend, which are all very flawed teams that don't really have a lot going for them right now, and unfortunately Weibo Gaming very much seems to be a part of that discussion, because any momentum they had generated in week number 1, it's all collapsed around them. This solo lane duo is performing pretty terribly right now. Erha has really not adapted to being the full-time starter in the LPL. Jeje looks very slow on basically every rotation. He's not individually making mistakes, but every jungler that goes into Jeje is playing fantastic right now, and Elk is just hoping and praying that this is not Ultra Prime 2.0 for this guy, because he looks omega stuck on this roster right now. As for Anyone's Legend on the other side, this is a nice win for them. I don't think it's like a complete rewrite of what happened at the end of last week where they ended up losing to JDG and I dropped them down to number 3, but it is a nice victory, and I think Tarzan played a lot better in this series, but that's really the crux of my biggest problem with Anyone's Legend. It's not really changing at all right now, which is that Tarzan is the entirety of this team in terms of their success chances. Kyle has been good, and Hope I think has been fine. You know, Flandre I think has had a really tough start to the year. He's been quite slow in terms of the way that he's played the game. Shanks I think has had some bad moments as well, but Tarzan's player of the series, and the overall takeaway from Anyone's Legend as a full unit right now has to be they either have Tarzan carry them to a victory and be the best player on the Rift and really take over, or they're just a mediocre team. Like, it really is just, I'm not going to say one player, but like it really is just one player that is making them competitive at the top end level. But Tarzan is one hell of a player if he can continue to carry in the way that he did in this series, both as a facilitator to set up the Azir Corki combo in game number 1, and then of course on the Kiana in game number 2, where he's just allowed to play a lot more aggressive when you have things like Syndra on the other side of the matchup. Either way, as long as Tarzan is playing well, as long as he's playing aggressive, and as long as he's pushing the game forward, Anyone's Legend is still going to be one of the best teams in the world. It's just, I don't know if they have another game plan. It feels like their macro is a little bit worse. They're certainly making worse mid-game decisions. That was something they were really good at last year. I know a lot of people have made a lot out of Tabe leaving and going to JD Gaming. I didn't quite know what that was going to mean until we actually saw it on the Rift. I didn't really know exactly, you know, where that was going to impact itself, whether it was going to be draft, whether it was just going to be, you know, overall decision-making in-game, and it's kind of been a little of both. I haven't hated their drafts really at all, but I definitely think their mid-game proactivity is a lot lower than it was last year. Maybe it just takes them some time to ramp up. Hopefully that is the case, but at least for now, like, I'm trying to be not negative because they won this series, but there are still too many mistakes for me. Tarzan's still playing excellent, and he was great in this series. Hope and Kyle I think are playing fine. I think Hope continues to look like the exact same AD carry he was last year, which is exactly what you want him to be. He's not a superstar. He doesn't have those kinds of mechanics. He's not Elk on the other side of this matchup, but what he is really good at being able to capitalize on good game states, and you're fine enough to give him things like Corki and Misfortune and let him win in the early 2v2. Kyle, I think, kind of got back on the board after a really rough end to week number 1 against both On and Vampire in their 2 losses. I think this was a much better showcase, although he's still making mistakes, especially on the Bard in game number 1, but somehow, some way he draws the Renekton at the end of game number 2, and that ends up basically winning AL that Baron fight. So, you know, good and bad. Flandre was fine. Like, he didn't make a huge impact on the game. He also didn't make a ton of mistakes. He was making a ton of mistakes in week number 1. Like, AL is still a team that I'm kind of concerned about in their current state, but Weibo is just not on this level. Zika is once again going to get dud of the series, and it's really frustrating. Zika had a really good week number 1. I continue to stand by that. I thought he played really well in the first week of the split here, but the first 2 series here in week number 2 have just looked very bad through the first 2 games. He made a massive mistake at the end of game number 2 here on the Renekton. This game is very winnable around a Baron dance, and what does the Renekton do? He flash stuns the Rel in the team fight, and I understand the idea of like, okay, who else do they have to kind of create and start fights? Oh, as it turns out, the Kiana, and then once you get a good situation for Hope to bullet time, this fight is over. It doesn't really matter if you take away the Rel's initiation attempt, if you have other things to deal with, and if your backliners in particular are not in a position to follow up on any damage. Like, you really don't have a way to play this game front to back if you don't have an early lead, and it just didn't really happen here. I thought Zika made a massive mistake. He's been bad in lane across this week and really bad in team fights. It's just not been a good look. I was really hopeful that this guy was going to be like a top 3 or 4 top laner in the LPL, and in week 1, I think he was looking like it. So far in week number 2, it's not even close. He's been a liability in both of their series. Xiaohu was fine. I know everyone's going to keep talking about him. He wasn't the better mid laner here, but I don't think anyone said that he was better than Shanks. He was not the problem. I think Jeje continues to be way too slow for the game right now. I think he is struggling to adapt to playing for Weibo. He's not looked good out of the gate. Like I said, for Erha, I think he's really just not feeling comfortable. He does not look like a top-tier LPL caliber support in the way that he's playing right now. Even if he's aggressive, a lot of those plays are not working out for him. Elk is Omega stuck on this team. Like, there's really no other takeaway from Weibo Gaming. Elk genuinely is one of the best AD carries in the world, and he's doing everything he can right now, but they're not competitive at the top of the LPL, and anyone's legend is proving that. They're a team in turmoil, in flux, that needs to kind of figure out their identity right now, and yet they're still able to 2-0. They don't even drop a single game here against Weibo. Tarzan really is that good. Again, Hope and Kyle are doing fine. If Flandra and Shanks are going to be at least consistently okay, then that's going to be enough for AL to be able to pick up victories, but this was not the kind of win that completely, assuaged all of my fears. I think there are definitely still some concerns with AL. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and this one's not going to take all that long to talk about. It's Invictus Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming, and holy lord, this was a demolition from BLG, just destroying IG. There's not a ton to go over here. IG was bad in week number 1. They got a big win over JDG that looks like it's going to be, one of their bigger wins, but it really just feels like they have JDG's number. Outside of that, they're not a competitive team. They lose to Weibo, who we just saw kind of get trounced a couple of times, or at the very least not be all that good at the beginning of this week. They're a team that's looking at top esports and going, I hope and pray that I can start picking up some wins against teams like that, because if BLG is crushing you in the way that they are in this series, it's just looking doomed for Invictus. It does not look like they're going to carry their Demacia Cup form into the LPL, but for Bilibili, I mean, yeah, number 1 team in the league, like, they have earned that title at the very least through their first couple of series. This team looks unstoppable at the current moment, and almost all of it comes from the fact that Knight is just not being denied right now. I mean, this is the greatest player in LPL history. He is one of the best players in the world. For me, he comes in at number 2. I've said that before. I think it's Chovy and I think it's Knight in that like Omega S tier, right? I think Ruler's kind of on the precipice of being in that conversation, but to me, like, those are the 2 best players in the world, and Knight is continuing to prove it. He is so far ahead. He is leaps and bounds better than literally any other player in the LPL, regardless of position, that he is just obliterating teams right now. Mid lane is a position that has always been a fall off after Knight, and it is only growing because this guy is just decimating. I mean, the Orianna, the flashy Akali plays at the end of game number 2. Like, there's not really a ton to dislike. He's winning lane. He's roaming and doing a lot of stuff in the mid game. He's being super proactive, playing with his jungler to allow Shun to be more aggro. We know he wanted to play with Shun again this offseason. It turns out that that is really working for Knight, and then he's a monster in team fights. He's making some of the flashiest, coolest plays you'll ever see, especially on that Akali in game number 2. Like, there's just nothing to talk about. Knight was player of the week in week number 1. He dominated every single one of BLG series, and he's carrying that over right now into week number 2. I do want to give a huge shout out to Bin, though, who has been awesome at the beginning of this split, I should say. This Sion game in game number 2 is probably the best game he's played so far in 2026, and that's a pretty high bar. He's already been gapping people on the top side. He looks completely back in terms of like the Giga Bin that we've been talking about as being one of the best top laners, if not the best top laner in the world at times in the past. I thought he was coming out of 2024, and he didn't quite follow that up. 2025 was not the year that Bin wanted to remember. It was one of the weaker years in modern memory for him as a player, but he looks like he is completely back in form. Saboro on the other side is an awful laner. He is really not a good player right now at the LPL level, but Bin still being able to, dominate in the way that he did on the Sion deserves to be noted. Shun looks great. This was a fantastic bring back for Bilibili Gaming. He's always been the best jungle option that they've had, and it was ridiculous that they got rid of him last year. I think Shun kind of had a point to prove it going against Wei. Obviously, Wei versus BLG is always going to be a fun conversation, but On has had a great start to the year. I think he was like one of the players of the week in week number 1, as I talked about. Truly somebody that was rivaling Knight in terms of creating for BLG, and Viper is just happy to be here right now. And that's crazy to say about Viper of all people. So not really a ton of analysis to give. BLG are just winning everywhere on the map, and they're playing phenomenal. Invictus, on the other hand, like, I hate to say that this was expected in terms of the results that we got, but I moved them to number 5 and talked about them as one of the weaker teams in Group Ascend for a reason. I don't think this team is very good. I think what we saw in week number 1 was a very flawed team that requires very specific circumstances to win the game. Photic is just not a good enough AD carry for you to be able to play for him, and if you have to sacrifice resources elsewhere, it's cooked. It means that these players have to play perfect. Specifically, the jungle mid duo has to be perfect, and they have to be better than their opposition on the other side. When they're not, this team is not competitive. Like, there is no way to win through top, and there's no way to win through bot right now, and that's a very, very limiting team. And when Rookie gets Omega gapped like he did going into Knight in this one, it's impossible to win anyways. Rookie's dud of the series. I mean, it's not even entirely his fault, but it is his fault, right? Like, he was destroyed by Knight. Like, this mid lane gap was ginormous. This was the reason I wasn't putting Rookie anywhere near number 2 in terms of my mid lane rankings, because Knight just always gaps him in terms of how these two play against each other. He doesn't have the hands to keep up. He's a smart player who's in the right place at the right time, and he can take over games still, but it is very clear that when he goes into players that are just this much better than him, he's not able to survive. He was useless in this series. Saboro got obliterated on the top side. I considered him for dud of the series because he just continues to not look like an LPL caliber player, especially going into these good top laners. Wei, I think, had a really poor series. Again, Wei had something to prove here going against, you know, Shun, who he was benched for at Worlds, against the team that benched him for it, and obviously he was chosen over Shun last year, all of this stuff, right? But he got completely gapped as well in the jungle. Photic and Jway are just bad. Jway has looked nothing like he did at Demacia Cup, nothing like the good version of him that we've seen over the past 2 years building on lower tier teams. It just looks not good right now for Invictus. They look very slow out of the gate, and they look very one-dimensional in the way that they win. They're going to win games because Wei and Rookie are a good mid-jungle duo, but outside of that, they really don't have anything going for them right now. And for Bilibili, I mean, they look unstoppable. Like, genuinely, I really do think they're like a full tier above anybody else right now in the LPL. We'll see how that ages throughout the rest of the week. They've obviously got quite a few games because this is Group Ascend, and they play by far the most, but they have not even looked challengeable. Like, the AL series was fun to watch, but Knight has been on a warpath. On has looked fantastic. Bin has been the best top laner in the league so far. Shun and Viper are looking good. Viper hasn't even had to do anything yet, and this team is still dominating games. BLG look as good as advertised. They look like the super team we wanted. But then moving on to day number 3, and we're going to take a trip down to Group Nirvana at the start of Game 3 for LNG Esports taking on LGD. And LNG is going to beat LGD in a 2-1 series win. This is obviously expected, but LGD put up at the very least a little bit of a fight. This team continues to be a lot scrappier than I think their talent would indicate. They looked obviously good at Demacia Cup. They got top 4 at that tournament, and were fine enough in their first showing in week number 1 against a really bad team in Ultra Prime in this group, but they're no match for LNG when they actually are playing up to standard. Game number 3 went 41 minutes, but it really shouldn't have. Like, there was no reason for the game to take that long. If there was any sort of way for 1xN to be more aggressive on the bottom side of the map, and if they had cleanse really at any point, that game probably ends in 30 minutes instead of 41 minutes. But, you know, alas, LNG have to take their time. They have to play a little bit slower. They just get to the end goal a little bit later than you would want, but they still look great. I mean, they're the best team in Group Nirvana. They continue to look like a team that is going to compete, especially near the top of like Group Perseverance in terms of how those teams are playing out. We just talked about a team like LGD Gaming not being so good on the uptick. Even teams like WE have early game problems right now. LNG are very much in the conversation for being, you know, a top 7 or, you know, best case scenario, a top 6 team in the league. They're just stuck in Group Nirvana. Krako for me is going to get player of the series once again here. He's just kind of facilitating everything that LNG are doing. He is definitely the in-game leader of how this team is operating. And that's really important for LNG. I think they've really lacked a lot of identity in recent years, and Krako certainly gives you an identity. He is a feast or famine player. He's going to be super aggro. He's going to look terrible in losses. He's going to look great in wins, and that right now the team is winning. So it turns out to kind of work for this team. Hang has been important, I would say, for LGD. He's been solid himself. Him and Tong Yuan have really formed a nice duo at the start of this year for LGD, but Krako definitely kind of took that jungle reign in this series and really pushed it forward. I think specifically that Xin Zhao game in game number 1 is the one that I really want to point out being the most effective. That was a game where he just completely blew up the entire map, and by, 15 minutes into the game, it was over. That's how you play Xin Zhao. He's just super aggro, constantly fighting. Again, he can be flippy because of that, and against the best teams in the league, he's likely going to struggle. That's why this team is probably not actually like a contender or anything like that, or obviously maybe they're Group Ascend. They hopefully want to be Group Ascend, but it's why I don't think they'll ever compete near the top. But at least now against the bottom tier teams, it's going to be super beneficial, and it's going to get them into good positions. But credit to the bot lane. That flash that we saw at Demacia Cup of them having great synergy together is very real. Like, they absolutely have that. 1xN and Missing are playing off of each other very well. This is an unbelievably good meta right now for Missing, who I think has been super out of meta over the past couple of years. I think the changes to the game have brought him back in and allowed him to play Nami and Lulu and a lot of these enchanters again. This is his sweet spot. He's maybe the best enchanter support player in the world in terms of just specializing in that. Obviously, there are players that might have better output on those champions, but being like an enchanter specialist, like, I think of Missing first and foremost as a player, and he is really benefiting from that. 1xN is super consistent, completely gapped Xiaoya in this series, and is clearly the best AD carry in this group. He's making a case and an argument right now to be borderline top 5 in the LPL. He really has been that good, and it's cool to see. Again, I don't know if he'll ever, get too much higher than that, but, he reminds me a lot of Hope. I think him and Hope are very similar players, and I think they're performing in similar ways right now. Sheer and Bulldog were solid as well. Sheer had a rough time of it in game number 2, but outside of that was fine. Bulldog makes way too many mistakes for my liking, but overall is still generating a ton of gold. He's really adopted into this aggressive playstyle, which I think is good for him because he was way too passive throughout the last couple of years. So LNG just look interesting. I think obviously they're so much better than every team in Group Nirvana that every speed bump is more so just a learning experience, but it's kind of working out for them right now. And then for LGD, I think the big positive is that they took a game off of the clear favorite in this group right now in LNG. Hang and Tong Yuan continue to look good in their wins. I think Saucy was excellent on the Jax in game number 2. I believe he played the AP Jax in this game, which has really started to take over. It's looking really solid. And Saucy, I think, is the exact kind of player to kind of make that style work. But the bot lane was just awful in this series. I mean, Xiaoya was in particular just really, really terrible. He's dud of the series, and it's not particularly close. His positioning is just bad. Like, I don't really know what happened here. Xiaoya is typically not the kind of player to make massive mistakes in the way that he was, but he was stepping up and getting caught. He was ulting at the wrong times in game number 3. He was getting dominated by a Corki as a Caitlyn in game number 1. Like, there were just a lot of weird mistakes. This was a very uncharacteristic series, I would say, from Xiaoya. I was starting to buy in at the end of last week, saying I feel like I've underrated him. Not that I think he's a superstar or anything, but he's probably a top 10-ish AD carry in the league. He's not somebody that's near the bottom. He's not bottom 3, which I think, generally I've kind of put him in throughout the last couple of years. This was a bottom 3, bottom 1 kind of AD carry performance. He simply has to be better than this moving forward. YCX I still think is a playmaker, but his laning deficiencies I think are coming out in a meta where he does have to worry more about the 2v2. That's certainly something that I'm going to monitor moving forward. He was really good on things like Rel and Nautilus and Leona last year, but now that he has to play Karma or Renata more frequently, it just doesn't look nearly as good. Again, Hang was very bad outside of game number 2. Hang is also a very feast or famine player. He still is one of the worst mid-game junglers you will ever see in your entire life, even with a lead. So especially when he doesn't have it, it's not going to look good. I do think the takeaways are fine enough. The solo laners were okay in this series. Tong Yuan continues to look salvaged from the RNG position, and Saucy, I think, is an interesting player for LGD, but LNG are just much better as a team. They're much more talented, and they have a lot more cohesion. The bot lane looks excellent. Jungle looks like it's going to be a facilitator for the rest of the squad. If the solo laners can continue to be fine enough, LNG are going to cruise through Nirvana, and they're going to likely get themselves in a group ascend with the pace they're on. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and we go back up to Group Ascend here for a matchup between Invictus Gaming and Top Esports, where IG are very importantly going to pick up a victory. They needed to get this one. Top Esports is the team that you kind of need to beat right now in Group Ascend in order to stay afloat and to try to be a team that competes to be top 4, because remember, top 4 is really where you want to land. 5 and 6 have to go ahead and qualify for the playoffs. If you're top 4 in Group Ascend, you automatically make your way into the playoffs. That means you are automatically, I believe, in Group Ascend. I could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure on the format. Maybe there is a way to not get top 8 even if you make playoffs, because I think maybe 10 teams are qualifying for the playoffs. I don't really know how this ends up breaking down. Either way, you want to get top 4. It is certainly the direction that you want to be in, and I think it basically guarantees that the rest of your year is going to be a lot simpler, or at least the rest of split number 1 is going to be a lot simpler. So picking up wins against a team like Top Esports is necessary for a team like IG to continue to move forward. For Top Esports, I have a pretty big rant coming in. Just sent out a couple of tweets on my Twitter account that you can definitely check out if you are interested, but I'll kind of talk about them in this video. For IG, basically everything we said about them in the previous series is still true. Like, Fodic is nothing on his own. Like, he's just not a player that really creates, and Jiachi was much better than him in this series. It was a super bloody, super aggressive bot lane series, and Jiachi was still trading a lot of gold back. If Fodic, didn't have Feng Yue to basically farm gold off of in game number 3, then I think this entire series probably looks a little bit different. I still think this bot lane is not clicking and they're not synergistic. I think Jue is even suffering right now from the fact that Fodic is not good at the game, and Jue is having his own problems. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he's been perfect either. He's also making a ton of mistakes. Saburo on the top side is not good, man. This guy just does not know how to play weak side. He doesn't really understand what he's supposed to be doing in the mid game. There are a lot of problems here, but the middle of the map is salvageable for Invictus. Wei and Rookie, the players that are coming back from last year, they're good enough to try to make this team competitive. Wei in particular I thought was excellent in this series. Nio had a lot of trouble in the back half here on the Dr. Mundo, on the Trundle in game number 2 to really stay relevant, and Wei absolutely pounced on that. Nio has, I think, had a couple of games so far this split that have not been very good. He's been incredibly feast or famine for Top Esports. Again, it's going to play into the conversation that I have about TES a little bit moving forward, but Wei, looks good against players that he can beat. Like, it really just comes down to that. He was really good in Demacia Cup because he was playing against a lot of players that he could just, farm up and out-mechanic and out-fight in the mid-game and generate leads on that front. And then, obviously, the same thing happened here. The Nocturne and Nivea duo in game number 3 proved to be surprisingly potent and really difficult to deal with for champions like Rise in the back end of that game. And I think Wei's aggressiveness and his ability to pull the trigger in the late game was really a big part of that. This team is still unconditionally too slow. Like, there's no real way to justify how slow they are playing on the map right now, but that's Wei, that's even Rookie to an extent, and it's just going to be the way that this team plays the game. If Wei is going to be in his comfort zone there, I would rather them slow the game down so that he can carry, because it's not really going to go in a lot of other directions. Top and bot are just not good enough. Rookie was also better than Cream in this series, and boy did they need to see that. They needed to see that Rookie can still perform. This guy's not been like the model of consistency over the course of his career. He's had a couple of really bad years. The Top Esports one actually comes to mind when they had to go and replace him with Cream the next year, and obviously that was a pretty big upgrade for Top Esports in terms of what they got out of Rookie in that 1 year that he was on the roster, but he needs to show that he can still be in that upper echelon. He might not be on the same level as someone like Knight, but he needs to be better than Cream. He needs to be better than Shanks. He needs to be, about what Honkyu has been for JDG, which is somebody that can push the game forward. So Wei and Rookie look solid. The rest of this team is still bad. As for Top Esports on the other side, this is a really easy conversation for me to have. Feng Yue, first off, is the easy choice for dud of the series. This was horrifically bad from Feng Yue. He was awful in this series. I mean, truly awful. He was bad on the Nico in game 3. Bad's not even really covering it. He was like horrible on the Nico in game number 3. I almost never even want to see him try to play that champion again. He was really that bad. I think he needs like a confidence rebooster after what happened in game number 3. He got completely abused by everybody on IG, by Wei, by Jue, by Fodic, by everyone. Like, it just was not going well for Feng Yue. And same thing kind of on the Nautilus, although I think it was a little bit less prevalent. Cream had a bunch of missteps on the Rise in game 3, even though he had quite a bit of gold. Nio looked completely outclassed in the jungle in terms of Wei, like, locking in and really slowing the pace of the game down. Nio really needs the pace of the game to be faster in order to feel more comfortable, as we saw last year on NIP. But this is a rant that I really feel like I need to go on right now with the LPL fan base. If you are out there and you're going, well, they got to get rid of Nio and Feng Yue and their failures, and Top Esports clearly will never be good with them after, what is it, like 7, 8 games, 10 games, like around that, you're a psycho. And if you are also the same person that is sitting there going, oh, I wonder why the LPL can never beat the LCK anymore, you need to look yourself in the mirror, man. Like genuinely, it gets super frustrating to see 2 young players finally get elevated up their station, 2 players that performed incredibly well, did everything they needed to do at lower levels. Feng Yue was a part of some of the best LDL teams of all time. Nio is a 2-time LDL MVP, came in for Ninjas in Pyjamas last year and salvaged their season in Group Ascend. If these players aren't ready to get called up, like, the region's cooked. Like, are you genuinely sitting here as a Top Esports fan going, gosh, I hope we bring back Tien and Hong so that when Jackie Love comes back, we can be competitive? That is basically signing up for never winning Worlds again. Like genuinely, like, I just don't understand the thought process of this region to go, oh, rookies are bad for 10 games. Let's, instead of giving them a pathway to development and letting them make mistakes in a split that does not matter, by the way, split number 1, instead of letting them make mistakes, let's overreact to 10 games, you know, call it right now, say the entire plan has failed, and just go back to all these veterans that have already proven to be not good enough in major moments. It's just a complete waste of everyone's time. And if you're the kind of fan that's really calling for that, I'm sorry, but we just don't we just don't agree. We will never agree on the way that the direction of this organization is headed. Them getting third and being a team that might get to the quarterfinals of Worlds, that's just not something that I think this team should be building towards. And I'm not saying that that's a terrible outcome or whatever, right? Like, you know, but you got to be trying your best. You got to be trying to actually win games here, and or at least like you got to be trying to win Worlds. That's the ultimate goal. And for Top Esports, you know, I don't think they're going to do that by signing TN and bringing Hong back and just kind of hoping and praying that they are what they were last year, which was a team that got super lucky on the draw and got to the semifinals of Worlds. But I digress. That's just a little rant on Top Esports. Give these rookies time. They're not good yet, but they're not supposed to be. The split doesn't matter. Let them figure themselves out, and hopefully they'll be good a little bit later. If you're at the end of the year and they've still been bad, then you can have that conversation then. And then for Invictus on the other side, like, again, it's Wei and Rookie versus the world. Like, they literally have nothing else going for them right now. If this jungle mid duo is not dominating, they can't win games. Luckily for them, they're good enough to pick up wins against most teams in the league, but it really does feel like they're going to continuously be gate-kept out of the upper 3, especially after the Game 1 loss to Top Esports here. But then moving on now to day number 4, our middle day, I guess, of the week and the return of these Super Days, and we go back down to Group Nirvana for a matchup between OMG and Ultra Prime. And Ultra Prime really dominate this series and pick up a big victory for themselves. Remember, it is bottom 2 that ends up being out for the next split in Group Nirvana, so that is the mark to avoid, and this is a pretty nice win for a team in Ultra Prime that, you know, was kind of my bottom 1 for basically all of this offseason. I really didn't think that a lot of the new players coming in were going to have enough time to be able to gel and get their feet under them in the LPL. Players like Grizzly and Henna that I think are fine enough, especially Grizzly, who I like quite a lot. I didn't think they were going to be able to be good enough day number 1 to really elevate what I thought was a weak roster. Liang Chen, Xiaoxia, like, I'm just not a huge fan of a lot of the other pieces here, but as it turns out, OMG's Demacia Cup was entirely fictitious. Anything positive that you could take away from that run in that tournament, including taking LNG to 5 games, it's all gone at this point. It really does look like they've lost all momentum, and this is likely the worst team in the LPL. Very unfortunate, I think, for an org that obviously worked pretty hard this offseason to try and not have, you know, 2025 be a repeat, but they were the only team that survived the culling last year, going down to the LDL with RNG, of course, not returning. And so, unfortunately, they might be making their way back down there for split number 2. Let's talk about it at the very least of why we're here and how I think this can get fixed, because the thing to remember is that we're still pretty early on into the split. Saber, for me, is the obvious choice for player of the series. This guy just popped off. Like, there's just not really a lot to say. He absolutely dominated in this series on the Zoe, on the Rise. I mean, this is Captain Saber stepping up for Ultra Prime, a player who has been, you know, kind of a homegrown talent, if you will. He came through the Ultra Prime system. He was, you know, kind of a questionable promotion. They stuck with him through some of the hardships at the beginning of his tenure, and then he got a little bit better towards the end of last year. We've seen some really good games and some really nice tape out of Saber so far in 2026. It's not been perfect. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he's not made any sort of mistakes, but it's clear that there is something here. I don't know how much there is on the rest of the team, although we'll talk about how there were some nice performances, some good laning phases from a couple of really key players here, but Saber really is the star right now of Ultra Prime, a really interesting prospect in the mid lane, and he's showing out. Haichao was obviously a player who performed well at Demacia Cup, has not always had the best tenure in the LPL, and Saber, I think, really just made mincemeat of him in this series. So that's a really nice sign. He's playing things like Zoe and Rise. It doesn't have to be Akali and Sylas and a lot of these champions he was finding success on last year. It does really feel like he's expanded his champion pool quite a bit. I want to give a big shout out here to Liang Chen on the top side. This is a player that I clearly just underestimated and undervalued. He has a much wider skill set than I was anticipating coming into the LPL. He really didn't show much on tape in the LDL. It was really hard to kind of fully evaluate him because he only played in Split 1 for that BLGJ team, the worst version of that team. And obviously, you know, there were a lot of things that were kind of a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces on that team last year. And him coming in was a big surprise to me, but he actually is a really interesting top laner because he's really good at weak side and he can do damage. Like, he's not afraid to step up and fight in team fights. It's just, he clearly is very comfortable just going into Harry, who's playing Rumble and Rek'Sai, and just closing the game out on tanks and then playing for team fights and being really adept, we'll just say, at that role. So nice stuff there. Henna and Xiaoxia I thought were really solid. Starry and Moham had a really terrible series. I think that had more to do with the OMG bot lane than maybe it did Ultra Prime, but it's still nice to see that they're like forming a good connection down on the bottom side. Grizzly was also really solid in this one, completely out-jungled Juhan. This was a weird series to talk about from a jungle perspective. Juhan has just been terrible in his 2 series so far for OMG, and Grizzly kind of gets on the board here. He's a player I really liked, and I think he played really well in this series, linking up with Saber and getting resources onto Henna. I just want to see him be a bit more aggressive in terms of the plays that he's going for, but overall, this was a huge win for Ultra Prime to put themselves on the board. 1-1 is not a terrible place to be after the first 2 series. Again, you just need to get top 2 in order to save yourself from this culling that happens over the course of the end of this split, and I think Ultra Prime have put themselves in a spot to at the very least contest. OMG, unfortunately, are in a pretty big hole. Starting 0-2 in Group Nirvana is worst case scenario. It basically means you're going to have to try and win out from this point onwards to save yourself. I think that it could theoretically be possible for a team that did perform a lot better at the beginning of the year, but there are some real issues with this team right now. Juhan is not good. He is dud of the series. I don't really know what to tell you. He was okay last year at times when we were watching tape of him, obviously going back to his time in the LEC or even his time on DRX originally. Like, he's shown a lot of good stuff in the past. This is just not a meta for a player like Juhan. Juhan is very slow as a jungler. He is somebody who does not necessarily want to be a carry. He does not want to be a focal point. He wants to play a little bit slower. He wants to facilitate the rest of his laners to pop off, and he's playing with Harry and Haichao as solo laners. He needs to be a bit more aggressive in the way that he functions with this because he doesn't have the talent on the rest of this team, and he is getting slaughtered for it. His first 2 series are maybe the 2 worst series of, any player so far in 2026 in the LPL. That's how bad he really has been for this team. Grizzly just completely gapped him. All Grizzly needed to do, I guess, was go up against a former LCK Challengers League jungler, and all of a sudden he can play like he did in the Challengers League again. Haichao and Harry continue to be massive weak links. Haichao was omega gapped by Saber in this one. Wasn't the worst series in the world individually from him in terms of like his mechanics, just was super far behind in terms of resource generation, and that is a pretty big problem for him. Harry's just not good on the top side. He was put in a bunch of winning lanes, Rumble into Cassante, Rek'Sai into Sion, and just did nothing throughout any of these games. Starry and Moham were terrible. Starry's positioning in this series was really bad. I'm a big fan of Starry. I think he's a player that could theoretically break through in the future on a better roster, but it's clearly not going to be this one. Moham is not an LPL caliber support. It looks like he's kind of regressed back to what he was in 2025, and it's just falling apart. I think that's the best way to put it for OMG. This team, I think, desperately wanted to try and hold on to their spot in the LPL, but right now they are very much on pace to go back down and not be competing in split number 2. For Ultra Prime on the other side, this is, like I said, a big victory, but you got to keep the train rolling. Only 2 teams are going to be making it out of Group Nirvana. LGD is, of course, their biggest competition right now, with LNG likely, kind of securing their own spot near the top of it. Ultra Prime already lost to LGD, but all you need to do is turn around 1 series and perhaps you could save everything. Ultra Prime has overperformed expectations in the past, and I think if you can get these talented players into a situation where they feel more comfortable, especially Grizzly and Saber, they could theoretically actually make some noise here. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's a pretty big one in Group Perseverance as we saw Thunder Talk Gaming taking on Edward Gaming, the 2 teams that had yet to pick up a series win, going against each other, and EDG finally get on the board here with a 2-0 victory over Thunder Talk. Thunder Talk are definitely the punching bag of the group right now. They might even be the worst team in the LPL. We won't really get the chance to know because they're not going to be playing against anybody from Group Nirvana at the very least in terms of like fighting for their life. But if they don't, step up soon, like things are pretty bad for this team in terms of the direction that they're headed in. Of course, I still like some of the young moves, and I hope this organization gives them time to blossom, but it just doesn't look very good right now, and there are some real concerns that some of these players just have limited upside. Then for EDG on the other side, obviously, we'll kind of talk about them in a bit more of a positive tone because finally we got a result that we were looking for from a team that was projected to be a top 7 or 8 team in the LPL coming into the year. They finally pick up their first victory, and lo and behold, if the mid and AD carry combo actually play fine enough, the rest of the team can win the game. ZDZ has been a bit of a disaster at the start of the year, but he was solid here. Xiaohao and Palkia, I think, have definitely been the best players for EDG, but it was Angel who stepped up in that second game on the Malzahar and really took over. I mean, this was a truly dominant Malzahar performance. We were seeing a lot of this champion at the end of last year in the Asia Invitational. in terms of like Showmaker and, even a lot of LPL mids were picking it up, but it was really popular in the LCK for, teams that wanted to control the pace a little more at the end of 2025. And I'm kind of glad to see it carry over into 2026, not so much as a viewer, like as a League of Legends fan, because it's not entirely fun to watch, but in terms of like actual meta progression, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that there are a lot of threats in the game right now that Malzahar deals with relatively easily because that ultimate is just so consistent and his cooldowns are relatively good. His laning phase is solid. He can split push well. Like, he is just a good pick, generally speaking, and if you can pair that up with something like a Xin Zhao and be really aggressive, like Zehen and Nico and like all these more aggro picks that want to go in, I think he complements that well. So Malzahar coming back and Angel playing him so well is huge to see. Angel is player of the series here. The Azir was also great in game number 1, but we really just needed to see this out of Angel. We needed to see that he could still, be a player that actually kind of takes over a bit at this level. I'm not trying to sit here and say that I need Angel to be a top 5 mid laner in the LPL. I don't think he's really capable of doing that right now, but I need him to be top 8. Like, I need him to be competent, and I need him to probably be the best in group perseverance. Like, that is the goal, is he should not really be struggling going up against players like Haru. As much as I like Haru and the mechanics are still very much shining through with him, Angel should not be struggling to win, and luckily we saw that here. So hopefully he can get some revenge against players like Karis and Kair a little bit later on in the stage here, in the group perseverance stage, but definitely a nice bounce back after 2 pretty rough series to start the year. Leave was also much better here, although I think he was decently enabled by the rest of the team. Leave just needs to not screw up. Like, that is the thing you bring him in here for EDG, right? Like, they had On last year, and On was giving them nothing. He was not generating resources in the bot lane. He wasn't playing particularly well in team fights. He was actively losing them games, and they just wanted an AD carry that could come in and allow this solid core that they had to be able to function at a better level, and Leave had been taking away from the team in the first couple series. When you leave it up to Xiaohao and Angel and ZDZ to generate resources, Palkia to a lesser extent in this series, Leave can just sit there and do the damage. He can be that mechanical carry that can win in lane and not worry about the game too much. He needs to reel in the mistakes, but, we can see here on the screen what it looks like when he does rein those in and when he is just a little bit more, I guess, connected with the rest of the team. I think ZDZ was the other player I really wanted to talk about. He's had a pretty bad start to the split. Keshi was not very good in this series. He made a lot of mechanical mistakes on some, more lane-dominant picks like the Mbessa and like the Renekton, and ZDZ was very much there to punish him for it. Zehen is such a broken champion that even ZDZ can look good on him in the top lane. Xiaohao continues to be great, as he almost always is, and Palkia I still think is a good playmaker. If Leave isn't screwing up the game and completely throwing things away, he can roam around and be that engage tool that he was last year. EDG are still an interesting team. I'm not willing to throw out my EDG hype just because they weren't good at the start of the year, but it's good to see that they're starting to pick it up now, and they got to keep it going. For Thunder Talk on the other end, like, this is probably one of the weaker teams in the entire league, probably bottom 2 alongside OMG, at least in terms of current form, and that's really unfortunate. I mean, obviously they're pretty lucky to not be in Group Nirvana. They're not at any threat of being relegated at all because they're not in that group, so they can kind of rely on, some of these rookies figuring things out. I like the idea of Haru and Keshi. Definitely not paid dividends so far. Keshi is going to get dud of the series here. He was not very good on the top side. Like I said, the Renekton and the Mbessa, both very aggressive and both not very good. Lane dominant picks that just fell really far behind, and he made some pretty crucial misplays on the Mbessa at the end of game number 2 as well. I think the main reason that this team has just been so uncompetitive, quite frankly, through the first couple of games has been Junhao in the jungle, however, where he's just nowhere close to what he was for Ultra Prime last year. He was, like, really surprisingly good. I did not like his LDL tape at all. I was really not a fan of his promotion up to the LPL, and he surprised me. He shocked the world, and I think he was really aggressive and showed a lot of good traits with things like Nefiri and Pantheon last year. He really, kind of valued that meta. He has been awful at the start of this year. He has not been able to go up against any jungler at this, level in this group and be able to survive. I know it's only been 2 series, but he has looked really not good against both Monkey and Xiaohao, and Monkey was really struggling going into that series, so you're hopeful Junhao can get it kind of together because he is the pseudo-veteran. He was the player they brought in to add stability and to add a bit of a floor to this team, and he is the one right now that's dragging down what that floor looks like. I continue to like the upside of Haru. Angel was a bit better here today, but Haru was not the problem. I think he is an LPL caliber mid laner. I hope he gets more chances. Ryan and Feather, they were fine. They weren't the problem here. I really do think topside was the biggest issue in Thunder Talk. I don't really know how they solve this, right? They're the weakest team in group perseverance. They're not really going to get a lot of chances to actually play against teams that are close to their their own skill level. We'll see what happens going into the rest of the year. They're probably going to be in Group Nirvana going into split number 2, and I just hope that this team gives these rookies some time, because I think there's something here. It's just not coming together right now. And for Edward Gaming, obviously, this is such an important victory. You don't just want to be some random team, right? Like 3 or 4 teams theoretically from Group Perseverance can make top 8 in the playoffs if all of them end up winning. So you just need to make sure that you are in a spot where you're actively qualifying for the playoffs. You're qualifying over teams that right now might be doing better than you. You're ramping up into what we believed you could be, because this team on paper still is incredibly scary. Then moving on to our third series of day number 4, and we're staying in Group Perseverance here as we got a matchup between Team WE and Ninjas in Pyjamas that NIP are going to pick up a big victory in. Don't worry, we'll cover these two teams playing against each other a little bit later as well, and that will be the series that I did cast across the rest of this week. But for now, NIP, man, what the heck just happened? How did we get here? How is Ninjas in Pyjamas actually good? How did we get to a spot where this team with Hoya, with Gwan, with Zhuo are actively like the best team in Group Perseverance? Like, how is that even possible? I thought this was such an obvious victory for WE. I really just thought Thunder Talk was that bad in terms of the way that things were going. No, like Ninjas in Pyjamas are the best team in Group Perseverance right now, at the very least, after this series. So crazy stuff to them. For WE, this is a pretty bad loss. I'm going to be honest. Like, Karis is Omega stuck on this team. I think Monkey and About played fine. Generally, Monkey's scoreline looks bad, and I think he had a couple of really bad moments, and generally speaking, this is not a matchup he should be struggling with at all. Gwan, again, a player who was in the LCP last year and was getting gapped regularly. If Monkey can't take advantage of that player, that is a bit of a concern. About, I really have no problems with. I think About has generally just been very good over the course of the beginning part here. He got targeted a lot in this series, and I think he tried to make the most of it in a lot of those situations, but it really just comes down to the fact that WE's early games are tragically horrible. Their laners are really underwhelming. Cube is maybe the worst laner in the entire league, regardless of position, and it really does feel like About and Yao Yao aren't going to generate a ton of leads on their own. Karis isn't even really that good of a laner. He is a team fighter. He is a flanker in team fights, and that's really where he's generating a lot of his tempo. Ninjas in Pyjamas, when they can get these early leads, are able to kind of take apart a WE team that really needs to come back to win. Guan, for me, is going to get player of the series. Do not look at the KDA. The KDA is still very good. 11, 12, and 42 is still a very good KDA, but the impact that he had on this series was massive. The Malphite continues to be a huge pick for Ninjas in Pyjamas. It really does feel like a very stable go button for them that they can reliably utilize to just get players like Care and Awesome into positions where they can take over. And then the Kiana, that's what really impressed me in game number 3, is Guan actually comes to the LPL, pulls out the LPL Kiana, and pops off on it. Is genuinely great in game number 3. That's huge. I might have just been wrong about my evaluation, and I'm really happy to be wrong. If I'm wrong in any direction, I really, really, really want to be wrong with, being too low on a player. I'm always happy to say, hey, Guwan's actually way better than I thought he was going to be, and he is way better than I thought he was going to be. He's actually come in and made a pretty big impact day number 1 on this team, which is really cool to see. Awesome, of course, deserves a pretty big shout out as well. Him and Zhuo have really nicely settled in as a bot lane 2v2 that can consistently generate early pressure, and then Awesome is awesome in team fights. Like, he lives up to his own name in the team fighting stage of the game. The Jinx, the Sivir, like, both of those games were pretty fantastic from him. He's almost always enabled in these particular games, but he's kind of been a pentakill machine over the course of his career. This is finally a team that I think can get him into those spots a bit more consistently, and that could be huge for NIP. Zhuo, I think, has been solid. I was a little higher on Zhuo than consensus coming into the year. I think I have been for a little while now. I understood why this team wanted to bring him in as kind of a veteran presence, and he really is paying it back out. Him and Awesome have been, pretty good as a duo. Even Hoya is gapping Cube because Cube is terrible. If Hoya is even looking competent, that's okay. On the top side, and Care was fine, even with Karis playing well. Ninjas in Pyjamas genuinely look scary right now. That's not a sentence I thought I would say in 2026. And for WE, there are some problems here. Their early games are just terrible. Like, it's really easy to diagnose what the issue is for WE. Even in their game 1 win, they still had to come back from a deficit to even try and play that one out. It's actually just astounding how consistent this team is at being able to play from losing game states. If they had winning game states, perhaps things would change a little bit. Karis continues to be on fire right now. He's playing the best League of Legends of his entire career, especially in comparison to what he was not only last year, but I mean, even like the last couple of years in the LCK. Like, the most interesting time for Karis as a a player was his time in the Challengers League and then that first year on Hanwha Life. Outside of that, he's just never looked like an interesting pro player until right now. He's finding those flank angles a lot more consistently in the team fighting stage, and his laning really hasn't been as bad as it's been in the past. He's opened up his champion pool a bit more to include more things than just Akali, and I think that's really helped him out. Like I said, I think About has settled in nicely. I think this was a tough series for him, but Yao Yao was not good. He's going to get dud of the series. He can be a pretty flippy player, and I think we are starting to see that again. He's decently limited in terms of the ways that he wants to play the game. He can play enchanters. I certainly want to make that clear, but he does want to snowball games. That's what was really intriguing about him when he came up, I believe with 1XM. I believe they came up as a package duo on Thunder Talk many years ago. They were winning in the 2v2, and when Yao Yao's not able to do that, and that's happening a lot right now for WE, he's not as effective of a player. I need to see a little bit more. So he's going to get done of the series for me. Cube, I think theoretically could get this. Cube is just bad at every part of the game right now. There's really not a lot to talk about. He has the worst stats in the entire league, and it's not particularly close. It's actually staggering how bad he's been at the start of the year. Hopefully he can turn it around. I'm not super hopeful on that front. I've always been pretty low on Cube, but theoretically, I guess there is something in there. Again, Monkey really needs to start locking in. This is a guy who should be by far and away the best player in group perseverance, like the whole group in general, and he's losing to go on. Even if I don't think he played terrible, he shouldn't even be in a situation where he's remotely neutral in the first place. So some problems for WE that they definitely need to fix, but NIP are clicking on all cylinders right now, and a lot of the players that I was criticizing at the beginning of the year, they're coming through strong. Guan looks great. Awesome in particular looks great. Care and Zhuo also look great. Hoya's there. You know, he got to play Cube, so I'm not going to overreact, but NIP might actually be the best team in this group. Then moving on now to day number 5, and day 5 is yet another super day. I believe it is the final super day of the week, however, and we kick it off with a group Nirvana matchup between OMG and LGD. And OMG pick up a massive victory here. They needed this, and they needed it badly. I guess winless is the word I'm looking for in your first 3 series in Group Nirvana is basically a death sentence. Remember, it's not just bottom 1, it's bottom 2. Like, you don't have to be better than one team. You have to be better than 2 different ones. 1 and 2 all of a sudden makes this group really interesting, because you know who else is 1 and 2? LGD. Now, on the other side of this, you of course have a team in Ultra Prime who just won their first series as well against OMG. So everything is kind of up for grabs right now. This is probably best case scenario for entertainment value. LNG is of course winning the group, but everybody else really has a shot to be able to get out of here in Group Nirvana. For LGD, this is a disastrous loss, like a truly monumentally bad one to take. You just played really bad in some key areas. A couple of the players that needed to step up just did not in this series, and they might look back on this and see a massive missed opportunity. Letting OMG back into this group could be disastrous again for an LGD team that needs to survive. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Haichao in the mid lane. Not used to praising Haichao on this channel after 2024. He's basically been a one-year wonder in terms of the performances he's put up in the LPL, but I do think there is something here right now in 2026. I think the mid lane pool in general has looked very good so far this year, and Haichao has done well with resources. He's been able to win early on in laning phases. He's been able to push the game forward, and even in game states where he's not playing perfect, like the Azir game in game 2, he's limiting mistakes, and I think that that was a huge problem that he had last year, is that for every good play, he would have 4 bad plays, and it just was never going to be worth it for him as a player to be making those trades. And the Talia and the Sylas, I think, were much more controlled. They're much more contained, and the good plays are still there. He's not making them quite as frequently. He's not been quite as aggressive, but he's still generating gold, and that's all you really need him to do. There is like a player in Haichao. He's just not ever going to be particularly consistent. Now, the problem is that dud of the series is actually going to stay on the winning side here, and it's going to go to Juhan once again in the jungle. That game 2 on the Kiana might actually be the worst LPL game I've watched. Like, it really was that bad. I don't even know what to tell you. Get this guy out of here. Like, you have another jungler on the roster. You were very notably playing a 6-man roster in Demacia Cup, already showcasing that you had another jungler available. Juhan is not it, man. You know, I advocated for young players getting the chance to prove themselves and to not overreact to 10-game sample sizes or whatever, and I still agree with that, but, like, this is, like, bad. This is beyond bad, and OMG season is on the line in Group Nirvana. It's not like you're in Group Perseverance or Group Ascend where you have some time to kind of figure out what you want to do before going into split number 2. Like, you have to figure this out now, and he is probably the worst player in the LPL at the current moment, so you just have to figure something out. If Hang is, like, omega gapping you, Hang, of course, going against his former organization here, like, go to the second option. Go to ReZero, who I think is an interesting prospect and someone that I do want to see get some time at this level, because they are winning 100% in spite of Juhan and not because of anything he's doing in the jungle. He really has been that bad. I will give some credit. Starry and Moham kind of locked in for this series and played better than they did previously. Xiaoya and YCX are certainly no pushover of a bot lane, and I think Starry and Moham did great. Starry in particular continues to position well, and I think the Ashe game was huge in game number 3 from him. Ashe Seraphine, I think, is an undervalued lane right now. We're all looking for those 2v2 dominant lanes. This is one that I don't think is getting nearly enough credit in the meta overall. Harry continues to be fine. Like, his laning's actually been really solid, and Saucy played really poor today, but I'm not going to buy into Harry. It's going to take a lot for me to, you know, pretend like the last couple of years did not happen for him as a player, but if this team doesn't swap out Juhan, if he keeps, you know, staying as the starting jungler here, like, their upside is severely limited. Their floor goes, like, down into hell if Juhan continues to play this way. But for LGD on the other side, like, it's bad. Like, there's nothing else to say. You should have won this series. The worst player on the Rift was on OMG. He was gifting you a series victory, and yet here you are, not being able to pick it up. Heng was good. He punished Juhan pretty heavily, especially in game 2 on the Nocturne. But where was the rest of this team? Where was Saucy? Where was YCX? Saucy is very, very lucky that Juhan was so bad, because he definitely would have gotten my dud of the series here. How are you getting gapped by Harry in lane? Like, I understand these matchups aren't all incredibly favorable, but, like, what are you doing, man? Like, you've got to start locking in a little bit more. We saw some good things out of him, you know, just a couple of days ago when we were talking about his top lane performance against Ultra Prime, and it just did not carry through into this particular series. So hopefully Saucy can figure things out. I think he's crazy mechanically talented, and this was just a bad blip on the radar, but these are unacceptable types of games when you are playing for your season against teams that you need to be beating. Same thing for YCX, who I think made way too many plays in this one. The Bard game in game 3 was just very lackadaisical, and I think it ended up being a bit of a problem. People are very high on YCX as a player. I've kind of pumped the brakes and been a bit more reserved about what to expect out of him as a support prospect, because I think he is a bit one-dimensional, and we've definitely seen that so far this split, where when things aren't necessarily going his way, they don't look all that good. Xiaoya, I think, is having a tough week. Tong Yuan is not able to carry this team. Haichao was certainly better than Tong Yuan on the other side. Heng was the only player trying to win for LGD in those other games, and that's only because I think the enemy jungler was so actively trying to lose the series. So for LGD, this is a very bad loss, and one that I think they will regret very, very heavily. And for OMG, you've been given a lifeline to get back into Group Nirvana. It looked hopeless after day number 4, but you've salvaged a situation where it does look like at the very least you can fight your way into a good spot. You need to make the necessary adjustments to make sure you can survive here, and that might be a change in the jungle. But whatever decision you end up making, you have to make sure you're getting the most out of players like Haichao and Starry, because they've proven that at least at the start of the year, they have something that can be built upon to actually win them games. Then moving on to our second series here of day number 5, and we're back in Group Perseverance for a matchup between Edward Gaming and Thunder Talk Gaming, where EDG are going to pick up the 2-1 victory. They are going to continue their rebound here with 2 back-to-back wins over the team that they needed to beat. It's not going to be a particularly long conversation. It continues to just kind of be what it is for EDG and for Thunder Talk. We already discussed these two teams playing against each other. There's no real reason to overly delve into this one in a way that we didn't already cover earlier on in the video. I do think there are some unique things that happened here that maybe didn't happen in the other series, but once again, the conversation just continues to be when Angel and Leave are playing fine for EDG, they actually look pretty good as a team. They have a lot of completeness to the way that they play the mid game, and Xiaohao gets to open up the map a bit more, and all of a sudden things look a lot better. I think specifically, rather than Angel kind of being the facilitator and the main carry like he was in the previous series, this time it was Leave in the AD carry role. I think both of them ended up really having their time to shine against Thunder Talk, and this is in a situation where I think Ryan was just getting resource after resource after resource on the other side of this. Leave was still more productive, even with less gold at times, in terms of the way he was playing out the end games here on Kaisa and on Sivir. It's really important that he plays these hyper carries at a high-end level, as I already talked about this week, because stylistically, they really need a hyper carry. They need somebody on the bottom side of the map who can be consistent and who can really push their game forward, who can capitalize on the resources that are likely generated from a mid-jungle duo that, you know, generally is very good for this level, but they're not exactly carries in the same kind of way. Angel can do that, Xiaohao can carry and can be kind of a primary threat, but both of these guys I think want an AD carry that can be that late game insurance policy. And again, if Leave is not making those catastrophic mistakes in terms of his positioning and the way that he's moving around the map in the late game, then things look a lot better for EDG. The only major concern that I have here with this team and with the way they played in this series that I feel like I need to dive into in this review here is ZDZ on the top side. And we talked about him having a really good series against Keshi the last time these two teams played, or the first time I guess these two teams played this week. The complete opposite happened here. Keshi was significantly better than ZDZ on the top side. He's actually getting dud of the series. I don't very often go dud of the series on the winning team, and yet somehow I'm doing it on back-to-back series here in this video, but this is deserved. I think ZDZ was just awful. I think he was easily the weakest mechanical player on the Rift here today, and I think him getting absolutely destroyed in lane is really concerning. This guy has crashed back down to earth in terms of what he was over the beginning part of his career. If he's going to continue to play like this, EDG will have a limited upside. It's the same thing with players like Leave and Angel not playing great at the start of the year. Like, EDG just seem off. It seems like a lot of the mechanics are not there. It's not even just this overall like mental problem or not being able to adapt or evolve to the new game. It feels like they're just playing bad right now, and they need to kind of get out of their own heads because of that. Again, I think Xiao Hao has been a good bridge in the middle of this split. If, you know, players like Angel and Leave are getting back on board, that's super important. But if ZDZ is not going to be on board, if this guy's just going to be a weak top laner like we kind of expected him to be last year, their ceiling goes down quite a lot. Their floor also goes down because Keshi was just better than ZDZ in this series, and that was frustrating with how well they were doing elsewhere on the map. For Thunder Talk, again, not really a ton to discuss here that we haven't already said. The solo laners are really interesting. Keshi was great in lane, and he continues to be a player that I think does really well in isolation, just is not very good at the big things and the overall macro part of the game just yet. I think he will get there eventually as a top laner. Reminds me a lot of a young Xiaoshu, which I think is a really encouraging trait here. I'm not going to say he's quite that level. I don't think he's taking over games in quite that level, but, you know, stylistically, I think it's a decently fair comparison. And Haru is just crazy. Like, this guy is a psycho. He is constantly looking to be the most aggressive player on the Rift at any given moment, and he really does have the hands to back it up. He just gets in his own way in terms of his decision making. I thought Ryan had his best series by far in the LPL so far here. Obviously, the KDA looks very good, but I think he did it, you know, in a way that feels repeatable, which is just generating resources in the 2v2, something that this team needs to start doing a little bit more of because you do have a lot of talent on this team from a hands perspective. Right now, the big problem for Thunder Talk is that their macro and their decision-making and their late games are terrible, but they're really not that bad at being able to play the game. If they can start to evolve and, you know, get a little bit better at the minor things, things could get better for Thunder Talk, but unfortunately right now, because they're in group perseverance and everybody else seems to be stepping up at some level, they might be the worst team in the LPL in terms of raw form, with a team like OMG winning earlier this week. So tough look for Thunder Talk. Junhao and Feather continue to struggle. Junhao in particular just doesn't really look all that comfortable on this team, but, you know, they're going to be last in perseverance, and that's fine. EDG have gotten themselves back into the mix with WE and Ninjas in Pyjamas. It's not going to be easy for them to climb their way back into top 2 where they probably wanted to be all along, but it's certainly a lot more possible now than it was 2 series ago. But that's going to bring us to our third series of day number 5, and this is the series of the week. It's the biggest one. It's the 2 best teams in the league in my power rankings right now. It's JD Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming. And JDG pick up a massive 2-0 victory here. This is an insane showcase from a JD Gaming team that has proven beyond belief that they are legit. IG be damned. They are the only team that has clearly cracked the code on how to beat JD Gaming at the beginning of this year, because they have looked phenomenal in every other sense of the word. Like, it has truly been exceptional how they have played these early and mid games. Their hands are ridiculously good. They have a perfect blend of skill sets in terms of the way that a lot of these players play together. I don't know, man. BLG has been clicking on all cylinders, and they got taken off their game here by JDG, and that's with their jungle mid still performing really well in this series. They couldn't even take a game off of JDG in this one, so just really excited to see what this team can do moving forward. Player of the series for me, how could it possibly go to anyone other than Hongq? Broadcast gave it to Gala. They gave both player of the games to Gala. I get it, man. Gala had some really nice moments. He was probably a bit more consistent in terms of not making bad plays. Are we really looking at the tape of this series and not saying that Hongq was the best player on the Rift? That's not your takeaway right now. You know, I tweeted out, obviously, in elation, we'll just say, when this series ended, because Hongq was popping off, and I've been such a visceral defender of Hongq. I've gotten comments on this channel, but more specifically, I've been seeing a lot of comments openly on Twitter and on Reddit, just generally in the LPL fan base, being like, oh, I'm not sure about this Hongq guy, when I've been sitting here, you know, telling you, man, watch the tape, like, watch the game. Like, his problems are not nearly as real as people think they are. You know, there are things that happen in League of Legends that are not always, you know, super repeatable, that go bad for you at times in games, right? It just is what it is when it comes to League. I think Hongq has looked very good at the start of this split. Like, there are generally things that you look at and you go, okay, this is a problem that I'm worried about and that I think is repeatable. And then there are things where it's like, yeah, he's just not quite comfortable yet playing with some of the players on this roster, including Junjia, who I think really had some trouble being able to get the ball rolling at the beginning of this split. He was having a lot more trouble, but Hongkyu individually was not showing the negativity that I think we were seeing online. I pushed back very heavily on that in week number 1, and I'm so glad to see that pay off here in week 2, because he is the first player that I've seen truly be able to go toe-to-toe with Knight in terms of his raw mechanics. He really is that good. The Rise, the Ahri specifically in game number 2, making flash plays, solo killing Knight in the mid lane. Like, these are things that people just aren't doing in the LPL, at least not consistently. He really can be a game breaker, and I think he is the X factor towards why I believe so much in JD Gaming right now, why I believe them to be a top 2 team and maybe even a top 1 team right now in the LPL, taking down BLG. Hongkyu really is that guy, and I'm glad that the first time we see him this week in week number 2, it's actually looking as good as advertised. Obviously, I do want to give a big shout out to Gala and Vampire on the bot side. I know I'm lower on Gala, and I'm not trying to sit here and say that Gala's a bad player. He's an A- caliber player. If you want to put him in that conversation, I certainly have no problem. What I will say is that Gala was not player of the series here. Hongkyu was definitely the most impactful and I think the most aggressive player on the Rift. I think Gala and Vampire have great chemistry together, and I'm really enjoying watching him play. Gala was definitely better than Viper. For me, Gala's been the second best performing AD carry, maybe the best if you want to say that. His team is certainly better than what I would consider the best performing AD carry at the start of the year in Elk. Gala definitely has a lot more help, and Gala's been able to really perform in that environment, but really you're splitting hairs. I think those players are basically on the same skill level, and he gapped Viper, who has had a slow start to his LPL tenure or his reintroduction to the LPL here. But I think a lot of why Gala is succeeding is Vampire is fitting well. I'm gonna say that Vampire has really connected, I think, not only with Gala but with Hongkyu as well in terms of playing the map. I think he looks great. He looks as good as you could possibly ask for. On had an incredible week number 1, was also very good earlier in week number 2, and Vampire was more active on the map with more opportunities than On in this one. So Hongkyu, Gala, Vampire, definitely the standouts. Junjia is still taking some time to get going. He does not look like he's, kind of break out and be one of the better junglers in the league. I'm not expecting him to be a superstar. I thought he was going to be better than this. Hopefully he can start figuring some things out. Haven't loved the tape so far. Shun definitely outplayed him in this series. And then Xiaoshu was very good on the top side. His KDA will not indicate that, but is he the best top laner in the league right now? Like, the consistency in lane is staggering. He is so good in the 1v1. It's actually absurd. He really has evolved a lot in that phase of the game, and that's not always Bin's strong suit. Like, Bin's strong suit is the mid and late game where he can take over in ways that other players just aren't able to match. He's still a great 1v1 player, but Xiaoshu is looking like somebody who could really decimate the game early on. So loving the way JDG is constructed, and BLG fall for the first time in 2026, at least in the regular season here. Viper has struggled, I think, so far out of the gate. He's going to get dead of the series for me. He was really good in week number 1. I think I was ready to say, yeah, Demacia Cup had happened, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. This was much more reminiscent of the Viper that we saw in Demacia Cup, and I think that there have been moments at other times, we even talked about it earlier on this week, where it's like, I just need you to lock it in a little bit, like just a tiny bit in terms of being able to play this out. It just doesn't feel like the same Viper that we saw on EDG all those years ago, and it certainly doesn't feel like the same Viper we've been seeing on Hanwha Life over the past couple of years, where stability was really one of the main pillars of how Viper was playing. The only thing I will say is that people do forget how volatile Viper was in winter in the LCK Cup last year specifically. He was really, really throwing games away in the playoffs. It just didn't matter because they're all best of 5, so if he insta loses one game, you can kind of live with that. Maybe it's just a winter thing for Viper. Maybe the year is starting a bit too early for him and he needs some time to ramp up. I'm going to hope that that is the case. Bin and On, I think, weren't as effective as they had been previously. Shun and Knight were solid. If Knight wasn't getting solo killed in the mid lane, I'd have a better opinion, I think, of the way he played this series, but I thought he played the map well, and Shun just generally is in great form right now. I think this is still a fantastic addition for BLG, and they might still be the best team in the LPL, but JDG have very much planted their flag in that conversation. To me, it's very clear that these are the 2 best teams right now in the LPL, and JDG just made as strong of a case as you can make that they deserve that number 1 spot. But then moving on now to our penultimate day of LPL action in week number 2, day number 6, and we kicked off day number 6 with a matchup between Top Esports and Anyone's Legend, and AL are going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Top Esports continue to look competitive. They continue to look like a team that is getting better series over series, but they're just not they don't have it yet. Like it's not all clicking together. I think Feng Yue and Nio in particular played much better in this series. Cream continues to have a decently underrated split so far. He's actually been pretty good for this team, despite the fact that I think Top Esports is making some major errors. Most of his games have been solid, and I'm not really complaining about that all that much. It's the true veteran on this team on the top side that I think really let them down here today. But for AL, like they're hanging on by the skin of their teeth. This team also is not inspiring confidence in me. I continue to see a lot of people out there talk about anyone's legend like they've looked good at the start of this split, and I don't agree. Like, I don't think they've looked like I've wanted them to at the start of this split up until this point. I think they rely so much on Tarzan being able to salvage bad game states for them. Kyle has obviously still been a big playmaker, but I don't think he's been quite as explosive in the 2v2 as he was last year. I still think getting him out on the map and being able to affect things in the late game has been huge for this team, but the mid games are not great. They're not generating resources in the same way. They have to come back against a top esports team that really shouldn't be that much of a problem for the talent level that you have here on AL. I'd love to sit here and say that the 2-0 week for them has been great, but really, it's Tarzan who's been great. He continues to be excellent for this team, and he is stepping up when they need him to. You know, it's funny, I talked about this last week. I went on my big rant where I'm like, hey, everyone dogged on me in the offseason and in the World's content for ranking Tarzan too low, and people just forget about games like the series against BLG or you know, some of the other things, quite frankly, that we saw in week number 1, the JDG series, where it's just like, I think people forget that Tarzan isn't always perfect, that he'll have games every once in a while where he's not good, but when he is good, he's dragging the carcass of anyone's legend across the finish line. That's what we saw here in game 3 on the Xin Zhao. I think we saw it at times mostly in game number 1 on the Pantheon, where he was the one being the most aggressive and pushing the game forward. Tarzan really is the lifeblood of what AL is doing, and if their macro wasn't so bad in the mid game, they wouldn't need to be in these spots, but it just kind of is what it is, and that's where I think the Tabe difference is really felt in terms of just how quickly they're making decisions in the mid game. Tarzan, again, luckily is bailing them out, but they need to stop getting into situations where Tarzan needs to bail them out. Kyle is still a big playmaker. The Rakan game in game 3 was really excellent. He was finding big engage angles, especially in the latter half of the game on things like Syndra and Felios, these low mobility carries that you know you need to be able to target if you're going to be able to come back in that game, and he was able to facilitate that. Hope continues to be fine. Like, he is essentially just, you know, your stock standard ADC. I really continue to believe that him and 1xN are actually kind of very similar players in terms of where they're at right now. You know, Hope is probably a little bit better in terms of the execution, but he also has a much better circumstance and surrounding core, so how much do I really want to factor that in? Flandra was much better than 369. It wasn't entirely Flandra who was pushing that advantage forward, but it's at the very least worth noting that a player who I thought had a terrible week number 1 on the top side there played much better here in week number 2, and then Shanks and Cream being the same player was certainly not disproven by this series. I'm going to continue to die on that hill. So AL have things they need to work on. Like, Tarzan is saving games for them. Kyle, I think, is still a big playmaker, but their mid games are bad. Their decision making is bad. And quite frankly, their early games need to be better. This is a team that is allowing too many resources to go into places that they don't need them to. They've gone from being one of the more stable teams in the LPL last year in terms of their victories to having some of the most chaotic games you'll see in Group Ascend. And for Top Esports on the other side, like, they should have won this series. I mean, truly, if 369 was even trying right now, they would have won, I think, game number 3. I really do think he was that big of a hindrance. Nio was playing decently well into Tarzan. I'm not going to say he was playing perfect, but he's going into one of the best junglers in the world, and he's starting to find his footing. I think he's been better this split than people are giving him credit for. People are talking like he's been a complete wash and like a waste of space on the Rift, like he's proven that he's not good enough to be here. This is his first real opportunity to be playing at a high-end level, like a true Group Ascend, you know, top 6 level. And I think it's taken him a couple of games, but he's settled in. He's had 3 or 4 games where he's carried for Top Esports, and he did that in this series in game 2, where he was excellent on the Wukong. I think Feng Yue really settled in here as a playmaker for this team, even if Jackie was overextending this time around. You know, Jacky's just a psychopath. He is going to get himself into bad positions. He really is trying to make up for the absence of Jackie Love in more ways than one. I thought Cream played well, but again, 369 was just bad on the top side, and he was my dud of the week for week number 1. It just feels like he's not trying in split 1. No Jackie Love, no effort from 369, and quite frankly, it's frustrating. It's disappointing to see out of him. I don't know. Maybe he's just playing bad. Maybe he's just out of form and it's not a good meta for him. Maybe all of these things are coming together at once, but like, really, if I had to try and diagnose the problem, I think 369 is looking at Winter as a split that he is just not even going to lock in for, and then split number 2, Jackie Love comes back and he starts trying again. It's just, it's not it's not good, right? Like, it's frustrating, I think, as a fan, when you really don't feel like every single player on the team is giving it their all, and I really don't think 369 is giving it his all right now. He looks very mentally checked out. He's getting dead of the series. He's been a huge disappointment at the start of the year, probably the biggest disappointment in the entire LPL for me at the start of the year, and I just hope he can figure things out, because if this is the gameplay we're getting, then it's not a new jungler or a new support that you're going to need. It's a new top laner that you're going to need if he's going to play like this. But anyone's legend, of course, picking up a nice win. You know, they've beaten some of the weaker teams in the group across this week so far. I'm not going to overreact to those, especially because these games were a lot harder than they probably needed to be, but getting wins is important, and AL still want to be a part of that upper tier conversation. I talked about it being kind of split in half. They still are in the top 3 for me. I just think every single time I watch them, I get more and more concerned that they're not going to be a part of the big 2. Then moving on to our second series of day number 6, and it was probably the biggest upset of the week. Quite frankly, it was Weibo Gaming taking on LGD Gaming, and somehow, someway, Weibo Gaming pull out the victory here. You can take the shy and the players out of Weibo Gaming, but you cannot take the spirit of Weibo Gaming out of Weibo Gaming. This is still the 2023-2024 version of this team that would lose against the teams that they're supposed to beat and then beat the teams that they are supposed to lose to. The chaos will never end when it comes to Weibo, and JDG are unfortunately the recipients here. If JDG was just even like remotely average at beating the worst teams in the group, they'd be ridiculously overpowered right now. They'd be undefeated, and they'd be looking like the best team in the entire world, or at least one of the best teams in the entire world. Unfortunately, their kryptonite seems to be teams with really big weak spots somewhere. Whether it's IG with Fodic and obviously not being able to play through bot lane, or whether it's Weibo having to try and salvage Xiaohu and the way he started this year. JDG just look at any other team that has a major flaw and just go, we're going to throw them a bone. You know, we can beat BLG. We can beat anyone's legend. We're not worried about them. We want to lose to Weibo. So obviously, I'm not going to read too much into this. I mean, there is some stuff to take away here, and I think there are real consequences of a series like this, but I'm not going to sit here and say JDG is washed, nor am I going to sit here and say that Weibo is completely fixed by this result. I just think this is the kind of variance that a team like Weibo ends up offering you. Erha is going to get player of the series for me. In the support position, it's either him or Elk. I know Broadcast gave it to Jeje. He was solid. I think he was fine enough in this series, but really, this was a bot gap. That's where you're looking for a lot of your attention. I mean, Erha goes deathless. He goes 0-0-20 in this series. It's basically the perfect support stat line. The Nautilus, the Alistair, both of these games were really dynamic and really explosive from him. I thought he was the one driving the game forward, and Vampire in particular was really outclassed in terms of being able to make some mid-game plays. I think Erha has had a really slow start to the year. Elk has basically been on his own in the 2v2. Look what happens when he gets an actual support. He takes down one of the best teams in the LPL in JDG, and I'm not just going to sit here and talk about Elk over and over again as much as I want to, because I really do think that this guy is like 1v9 on Weibo Gaming, but you give this guy a modicum of support and he can actively make you one of the best teams in the league. Like, it really is that simple. Erha finally having a good series, finally being able to outclass his support opponent, means that Elk has the tools to play Jhin and carry, to play Sivir and carry, and to really look fantastic in both of these games, to outplay Gala, who everyone is putting him up against. And I understand this series is not entirely Gala's fault, but let's not pretend this wasn't a 2v2 gap, that Elk and Erha were not just straight up better than Gala and Vampire, because they were. I'm going to be super for real with you guys right now. If the season ended right now, Elk is getting my first team all-pro vote. Like, he really has been that good for this team, and I want to continue to give him credit. If Erha is going to step up and be the player he was here, that is huge for this team. I think the top side continued to be solid. Zika goes deathless. That's always a good sign. Xiaoshu has been one of, if not the best performing top laner so far this split in terms of just the raw metrics. To see Zika finally get some of that week 1 form back after a really bad start to week 2 is a really nice showcase. Again, AP Jax looks very strong, and it looks very good as a counter as a hen in particular. Jeje gets the broadcast player of the series. He really controlled a lot of the macro of this. I think he controlled the map well. Junjia just really struggles against players that are going to be able to, you know, push the game against him. He is a much slower player, and he's really struggling, I think, right now with the pace of the LPL. I'm sure he's going to be able to catch up. He was much faster at being able to make these things happen on EDG when he was in the LPL back in 2022, but it just doesn't seem like he's comfortable with that yet. Jeje took advantage and ended up really doing well, I would say, for himself in the jungle. Xiaohu is the only piece where it's like, you're just kind of a part of the team, but Xiaohu's kind of been a huge negative for them so far this year, so him just being neutral, I think, is generally fine enough. The bot lane just looks awesome, and Weibo is, like, interesting. They're just super flippy, and this is what the upside can look like, because JDG is not a bad team, and I think you got some okay performances here. I don't think, like, Xiaoshu was all that terrible. I think Hongqiu had a decent series, all things considered, but Gala and Vampire getting completely outclassed on the bottom side just made this very, very difficult to win, and I put a lot of that on Vampire. I think he was the one who really kind of got out outshone in this one. Erha was great, and Vampire was very, very bad. I've seen some takes out there that Vampire's not really been all that important to JDG's success, or that he's kind of been the weak link, if you want to put it like that. I really don't agree with that. I think Junjia has probably been the weak link, quote unquote, so far of this team at the beginning of the split in terms of connection to the rest of the team. It just doesn't feel like he's comfortable playing with them just yet. I don't know if it's a communication barrier or what, but this is really the first time where Vampire felt completely separated from the rest of the map and not really, actively helping anything other than the enemy team win the game. The Leona, the Rakan, both of them really ended up falling short. He's a player that has been very flippy in the past. And remember, this is a player that is going into year 3 of being a competitive League of Legends player. Not an LPL player, but like full-on competitive. Like he was thrust right into tier 1. He's still learning. This is still a player that I think has a lot of growing to do, and you're hopeful that he can continue to grow here on JDG. But these are the growing pains. These are some of the negatives that you have to take. I also think Gala deserves some criticism for this series because his 2v2 was really weak. Playing Misfortune Leona into Jhin Nautilus is not exactly the most difficult thing in the world. Same thing with Varus Rakan into Sivir Alistair. You're not sitting here going, oh, how do we ever try and generate resources here? Gala just wasn't in good spots, and he wasn't playing well in the early game, and that just goes back to say that, like, Elk is just a better player right now than Gala is, and I think this series proves it. My AD carry takes, man, I hate to be the braggadocious type. We're an hour and a half into the video, though, so if you don't like my takes, you probably logged off already. My AD carry takes this year are popping off. Like this is a position that I think I'm crushing right now, and quite frankly, I'm buying it on Elk, and Gala's good. He's very good. He's the 3rd best AD carry in the LPL. Maybe the 2nd best if Viper is going to underperform at the start of this year, but Elk is number 1, and I don't think Gala is like on that same level right now. I think this team has issues, and while I think they are very good as a unit, when you don't get great performances out of some of the flippy or younger players, you can lose games, and that's what we saw here. Hopefully they're going to be able to fix things. Again, there's a lot of reason to believe it will continue to get better for them as they continue to grow and get more synergistic, but it's a big win for Weibo, who are trying to get themselves top 4. They put themselves in a great spot in week 1 by beating Invictus, and kind of took away a lot of that positive momentum by losing to Top Esports earlier this week. I think getting this win back and getting themselves back onto a spot where they really are on pace to get top 4 is really nice. I don't know if this team is going to make a big impact. I still believe they have a lot of, problems and things that they need to figure out, but boy, Elk is like on ridiculous pace, and you can basically win almost any game through him right now. But that's going to bring us to our final day of action here in the LPL in week number 2. A mammoth video coming in, as you guys know, with the LPL. Sorry for getting this one out late, by the way. If you're all the way into this, you're probably watching it either the next day or, pretty late at the very least here on the East Coast. It's just a lot of games to watch, but luckily I didn't have to rewatch these ones too deeply because I got to cast this next series. It was the rematch of Ninjas in Pyjamas and WE kicking off our final day of action, and WE is going to get their revenge in this series by picking up a 2-1 series win, but do not look at anything on your screen. Do not take away any number, any sort of actual statistic from this. Go watch the games because I can't sit here and summarize what happened on the Rift here without you going and watching them. I'm so fortunate to have been able to be on the live cast for this one because this is the craziest series of the year globally up until this point. I mean, there's just not really a lot not to like about this. The moment a team got a 2 or 3K gold lead, they would immediately throw the game away. It didn't matter which team, it didn't matter what game. All 3 of these games were just, the most chaotic, back and forth, messy League of Legends you will ever see in your entire existence. I'm gonna quickly go over it here, but truly, if you want a recap of this series, just go and watch it. I know it's long. I know these are 3 long games, but these are 3 of the most fun games that I've watched all year long, and I got a chance to cast them live. So yeah, go and check them out. Had a great time on the cast. But to talk about, I guess, the takeaways for me from this series, the WE bot lane was excellent. They were easily the best unit on the Rift here today, even if the rest of the team wasn't always living up to that same hype. About and Yao Yao, I think, both played phenomenal. About, for me, is the one who's going to get player of the series, but if you wanted to give it to Yao Yao, I certainly have no problem with that. He was my player of the game for game number 3. I think his Alistair actively won them that 3rd game. He was exceptionally good here, and that's not to say that I think Awesome and Zhuo on the other side were terrible or anything like that. I think they made some pretty major mistakes on the Kalista Renata in game 3 that ended up really costing them, but Yao Yao was so explosive with the plays that he was willing to make, and he made multiple game-winning plays. He got about free kills on the bottom side by knocking people into tower. He knocked the jungler, Guan, out of the pit for them to be able to steal the Baron in this game. Not that getting Baron is a good thing. It seemed like every single time a team got Baron, they almost instantly threw the game away. So it is what it is. But like Yao Yao made game-winning play after game-winning play in this one. And for all the faults that we've given him over the course of this year, I still have some belief on this guy that he can be a pretty good support at this level if he can just lock in. And I think we saw that here. But About, for me, is player of the series. I mean, the damage that this guy is capable of doing in the right circumstance is ridiculous. He was my player of the game for game 1. He was my player of the game. Well, he wasn't my player of the game for game 3. That would go to Yao Yao, but About was pretty darn close for game number 3 on the Sivir. He really just was excellent. He was even fine on the Corki in game number 2. I'm really not going to give him fault for the reason that they lost that game. Same thing for Yao Yao on the Braum. You know, I think he just looked really solid, and I think he's getting better game after game. He's getting more used to playing here in the LPL. I love this guy as a prospect. Maybe not loved. I liked this guy as a prospect, at least a good amount, and I think he is living up to a lot of the hype I was hoping for him. So the bot lane definitely looking good here. I think Karis, for the most part, looked solid. He made some massive positioning errors in game 1 and game 2 that really cost them the series, got caught out multiple times. It didn't matter because NIP also cost themselves the series, if you really want to put it that way, but Karis made a lot of mistakes here, so not the best series we've seen from him, but he had a lot of really good plays too on the Rise, dealing a ton of damage. Even the Azir, baiting people in and then shuffling them back to the rest of his team. Like, there were definitely moments that worked out. I just think a lot of them were set up by mistakes, and that's not necessarily a great way to play. But Dud of the series for the 3rd time this week. It barely ever happens, and it happened 3 times in 1 week, is going to stay on the winning side. How can Dud of the series go to literally anyone that isn't Monkey? This guy tried his absolute hardest to lose this series. I have never seen a jungler attempt to lose more than Monkey in this one. He was awful on the Wukong, like truly game losing. He builds full damage instead of building any sort of bruiser items in game number 2 on the Wukong, and gets instantly deleted in team fights, almost all, like instantly loses his team the game. And then the Mbessa in game 3, they have this gigantic lead that it feels like they're never going to be able to throw away. And then what does he do? He just walks in and kills himself, and he throws the game away. Like, it's absolutely absurd. I've never seen a player play quite like this in terms of like bad decisions. He was horrible in this series. He was easily the worst player on the Rift, and they won completely in spite of him. It really is kind of reminiscent of Juhan earlier in the week for OMG, where it's just like, what are these junglers doing, man? Why are they trying to lose the game for the team that is winning them the game? It's just kind of ridiculous. Cube is just not a good laner. He continues to have a 100% win rate on Yorick, which I find very funny, but overall for WE, they're very thankful that their bot lane was good here today, because they were the best part of the entire series, and they don't win without them. For NIP, how do you lose this? Like, how is it even humanly possible that you lose this? How are you in the position that you're in both game 1 and game 3, and you lose this series? It's just absurd. You could even consider this kind of a 3-0 for NIP, and you just couldn't close out the 2 games that you needed to. You know, Guan continues to be aggressive, not always in a good way, but once he was off of, you know, the point-and-click engages, you know, things like Vi and no Malphite in this series, like Kiana definitely looked a bit shakier. It's something to monitor. I think Joel was generally fine. Awesome had some great team fight moments on Yunara and on Misfortune earlier on in the series, but the Kalista was a huge letdown, even if he was okay in the team fight stage. Hoyo was, like, unironically the best player on Ninjas in Pyjamas, was actively winning them fights and putting himself in the right spot. That's what going up against Cube will do to someone, is all of a sudden Hoya becomes a good top laner because Cube really is that bad. And then Care, I think, was also decently solid, maybe needed to be a bit more aggressive around the Gnar engages in game 3, but he was just kind of standing there being Machine Gun Cassio, and it was kind of working out for this team. They really should have won. Like, they were the more consistent team. WE had the higher highs with players like About and Yao Yao, but they also had the worst players on the Rift with players like Monkey and Cube. Like, NIP just kind of all slotted in the middle there, where most of them played fine, but none of them played exceptional, and I think that was the big difference maker. Still feel good about NIP, and I likely still think they're better than WE, even coming out of this series, but go and watch this. It was chaos incarnate, super fun to cast, super fun to watch, and I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the video here, and one that I was really excited to talk about. It's yet another rematch from earlier on this week. It's Top Esports taking on Invictus Gaming. But this time, Top Esports is going to be able to pick up the victory. We talked about, you know, Wei and Rookie being good enough to be able to separate them from Top Esports earlier on in the week. Well, that's already distinguished and diminished. It's gone. Top Esports are better than IG, and I think they kind of proved that a little bit in this series. I know it's a very weird thing to say, like, oh, definitively, but like IG kind of struggled a bit against Top Esports earlier on this week. They kind of needed Wei and Rookie to step up, and Wei and Rookie were excellent in that series. But Saburo, you know, is not a good laner. He looked bad in that series, and Fodak and Jway, you know, Jway had some moments in that series that made me question, like, what is this IG team really? Well, here's what it is. Like, Wei and Rookie weren't better than their opposition in this one, and the entire team fell apart. They are so one-dimensional. They have no secondary, you know, win objective, because their bot lane and top lane are just so not Group Ascend caliber that if Wei and Rookie aren't hyper carrying every game, it's just cooked. And Top Esports took advantage of that. This team is ramping. I'm still so tired of hearing all these people talk about Top Esports as a team that, isn't ready to compete in Group Ascend. Their goal was not to compete in Split 1. It was to figure out what they had, see what they could build upon, and get these players used to playing in a low effort environment before Group Ascend really started in the spring split and they could start to ramp up. They've gotten better every single game. This team is ramping, and they are ramping successfully. 369 actually locked in today. He tried. Not that that's all that hard against Saboro, who everybody is beating up right now, but Fong Yue in particular really felt like he kind of figured it out in this series. That Poppy game in Game 2 was disgustingly good. He's player of the series, and to me, it's not close. Nio was in consideration. Cream was definitely in consideration in the mid lane, but Fong Yue was great. I really do think he was the best player on the Rift here for Top Esports, and especially after how awful his Nico game was earlier this week, it's really nice to see that he can kind of stabilize the ship and turn things around, at least at some level. This team has some pretty big wins on their resume right now. They're beating Weibo Gaming, they're beating Invictus, and if Fong Yue is starting to come along and he's gapping Jue like he did in this series, because let me tell you, this was not a close support matchup. Fong Yue was completely gapping Jue in this series. Then things get a lot more interesting for Top Esports. I think Nio has started to get better. He's on, again, I said this earlier, but he's been underrated for me throughout this split and this week anyways. I think he's had a lot of good games. It's just that the bad games kind of stand out to people. He's a decently feast or famine jungler. You're hoping that this is stage 1 of Nio and that stage 2 is him just upping the consistency a little bit, because the good games are already there. And we saw that here against Wei, who everybody is enamored with, I guess I should say. And Nio was just better than him in this series, just like he was better than Jeja earlier on in this week as well. So a lot of good to say about the young players here that everybody was willing to give up on after 7 games. It just goes to show how ridiculous the LPL fan base can be sometimes. Cream is playing awesome right now. Is this guy a top 3 mid laner in the LPL again? Like, he's better than Rookie. He certainly showed that here. I thought he had a great week overall for Top Esports. He was really good against Weibo as well, and he was even okay, pretty decent in the first Invictus Gaming matchup. I certainly wouldn't say that he was the problem. He had 2 really good games in that series and then made some pretty big mistakes in game number 3, but again, it's mid lane in the LPL. You just have to kind of accept the mistakes right now. Cream's playing great. I think right now, obviously, it's Knight as number 1. To me, Hong Q is number 2, and right now I would slot Cream number 3 in terms of the production that's going down. Him and Shanks are in similar spots. You can talk about Cream versus Shanks earlier this week, but they basically played the same game, and Shanks has a better team, so I don't know, man. Like, the Cream stocks are re-rising, and I think that that's really good. I think he's had a good start to the split. Jachi, I thought, was great here. It's against Photic and a Jue that's running it down, so I don't want to take too much. And again, 369 was going against Saboro, so I don't want to, go into it too much. But Top Esports stocks are definitely rising. This might not even be the worst team in Group Ascend. Like genuinely, this could be a team that gets closer to top 4, even in split number 1, with the kind of progression they're making, and quite frankly, just how bad the rest of Group Ascend is right now. Invictus is not a good team. I don't want to, plant my flag too much in a negative direction, because if this team does well, I'm going to look really stupid. But, I just don't really see an avenue for this team to ever be competitive at the top level with the way that they are built here. Saboro, Photic, and Jue are just not good enough. Wei and Rookie are fine, but it's not like they're 1A type players. It's not like they're number 1 in their position. Wei is a top 5 jungler in the LPL, and Rookie is a top 5 mid laner. But you need better than that if you are in Group Ascend, the top 6 group, and everyone else on your team is, is barely top 8 in terms of their own position. Jue has not been playing well at all. His split has been really bad since Demacia Cup. Photic is a bad player. He doesn't deserve to be on this team. He probably shouldn't be on any LPL team. And Saboro looks like he can't lane at all. He genuinely might be the worst laning top laner I've ever watched. At least at a consistent level, this guy is just losing over and over and over again. It's staggering how bad he is in the 1v1. He has other parts of his game that he can play, but that 1v1, I'm serious. I don't know if I've ever watched a player who's worse in the 1v1 than Saboro at this level. So it's just really, really hard for this team to win, because Wei and Rookie have to do everything. Wei had moments in this series where he was trying to push the lead forward. Rookie was losing in the mid lane, which is tough, and of course everyone else was also losing. You just can't salvage those game states. Invictus does not look very good to me. This was a team I was prepared to rank 8th or 9th in my preseason power rankings, my split 1 power rankings before they did well at Demacia Cup. Maybe I should have stuck to my guns. I mean, truthfully, this is looking like the worst team in Group Ascend, and I don't know if everyone else is going to have that opinion, but it's the opinion I hold after watching them this week. I really do believe they are the worst team in Group Ascend, and I think Top Esports is better than them. I don't think they're the bottom of the barrel right now. I think this is a team that beat a team that was at number 4 for me in the power rankings as well this week in Weibo Gaming. If they can start to get a tad bit more consistent, and especially if these young players are getting more comfortable every single game, Feng Yue and Nio in particular, I don't know, man. Top Esports genuinely have some real talent here. Cream looks like he's in form, and 369 wasn't completely mentally checked out. Is it crazy to say I actually like this team right now? All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 2 overview and analysis video here in split number 1. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 2 weeks of action for Ascend, Perseverance, and Nirvana. Of course, because these are coming out on Monday, as always, I am missing the first day of games for week number 3. I have not watched them yet, so I'm not going to comment on those. They are not factored in at all to the standings, nor are they factored in to the power rankings. I just kind of want to update people who are maybe new here on that because I got the other LPL video out a little bit earlier than maybe you would have expected, but typically I'm going to be 1 day behind just because I need to film these on Monday. So I hope you can understand, but up on the screen, like we said, the updated standings, and right next to every single team are my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 14. You can see, where everyone is ranked and how they have changed from last week to this week in the change column as well. Some big risers and big fallers this week as we got a lot more information, especially on the lower groups, but in Group Ascend, I feel pretty okay with where I landed last week. Yes, JD Gaming was able to take down BLG, but the loss to Weibo did scare me at least a little bit in terms of what this team's floor can look like, and while I do think they have top 1 upside right now, I still feel a little bit better about BLG, but they are clearly top 2 for me right now, and AL is very clearly number 3, despite the fact that they had a 2-0 week and actually looked relatively okay in week number 2. I still don't know if I trust them at the same level that I trust BLG and JDG with the way that they're performing right now. Still think it's a very clear top 3, but definitely something that is worth noting. The rest of Group Ascend is also relatively easy for me. I'm actually leapfrogging Top Esports up to number 5, and IG is dropping down to number 6 in my power rankings. They're, adjusted like that in the standings already, and I think it kind of showed itself on that final day to be the case. Top Esports was decently competitive against IG when they lost to them early in the week, and then they 2-0 them relatively cleanly at the end. It does feel like this team is getting better every single series, and if that continues, they could be as high as number 4. They beat Weibo Gaming this week as well. It's just that Weibo had some pretty big moments against JDG, and I didn't want to, knock them too much for their inconsistency. They're still a team that I think has a lot of upside, and Elk is just playing too well right now for me to drop Weibo Gaming, but I do believe that Top Esports is better than Invictus. I think they are a more well-rounded team, and I talked about that, relatively, I guess at length, we'll just say, throughout the rest of this video. So those are my Ascend rankings. I almost consider dropping both Top and Invictus lower than number 5, but just didn't really feel comfortable doing that. LNG is still going to stay at number 7. They look great so far in Nirvana. Not going to say they look perfect. They still rely a ton on Krakow being very aggressive in the early game and being dominant, but it's working out right now for them, so you can't be too mad. And then some changes in Perseverance. Up 5 spots from last week is Ninjas in Pyjamas, who make their season debut and look great throughout most of this week. They're going to jump up to number 8 for me. I do think they're a top 8 team in the league right now, even though they lost to WE at the end of the week. I think that series should have been theirs, and they clearly were better than WE the first time they played against each other. Right now, I'm going to lean on the side of NIP being in a better spot. WE is going to fall to number 9, but both of those teams are basically occupying spot 8.5. I think they're both in pretty similar spots. They're the 2 best teams in Perseverance, and I imagine they will end that way. But EDG is still on their tail. They're going to fall all the way to number 10. This is a very low ranking for a team that expected themselves to be better than what they are right now. But quite frankly, this is just where they are. They have 2 wins on the split, and they're both against a Thunder Talk team that I currently have as the worst in the entire league at number 14. It's just not looking good for EDG. They have some big opportunities over the back end of the split. They need to start stepping up. But a couple of changes down in Nirvana as well. You've got Ultra Prime jumping up to number 12. LGD staying at number 11. I know they lost to OMG, but that series really felt like they, again, should have won. Hang actually had some really good games, and they just could not capitalize elsewhere on the map. Saucy is not going to be that bad. YCX is not going to be that bad in other series. I imagine they are the second best team in this group, at least for now. Ultra Prime, like I said, jumps up to 12 with their win over OMG, and OMG drops to number 13. They would have been 14 if they had not beaten LGD, but with that win, they at least keep themselves out of being the worst team in the league. If Juhan is playing the way that he is, this team is still going to be probably the worst team in the LPL, but I had to give them some credit because they at the very least have kept their hopes alive by picking up a win and actually have something to play for across this week. So those are my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below. I'm always curious to know what you guys agree with and what you disagree with down there. But let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 2. My player of the week is going to go to Tarzan, the jungler for Anyone's Legend. I know I've spent the entire week kind of ragging on AL despite their 2-0 play, but honestly, the reason I'm ragging on them is because Tarzan had to absolutely carry this team across this week in both of their series against Weibo and Top Esports. If they didn't have him, they probably don't win either either of those series in terms of how it played out. So Tarzan definitely deserves a lot of credit for it, even if the team's overall outlook is kind of suffering. I think he was excellent, and he continues to really be the driving force. This team has a really hard time winning without him popping off, and it's a good thing that he popped off this week. Hopefully he can keep some of these performances up. My honorable mentions here, leave the AD carry for EDG. EDG had a nice bounce back week after a pretty terrible week number 1. There are some things they need to clean up, and Leave is certainly not a perfect player, but in their 2 wins over Thundertalk, he was exceptionally good for the team, and he needs to step up like that. He needs to be that big hyper carry that can really take over in the way that he did this week. And then Cream, the mid laner for Top Esports, I was really hyping him up throughout the video, and I realized when I got to this section, yeah, he kind of was, in the running for player of the week for me. I really think even in their losses, he looked decently good. He really only had 1 bad game across this week, which I would say was the Game 3 loss to Invictus. Outside of that, I genuinely just think he was solid for the team. He made a lot of big plays, and in their wins, he was really important. Cream, I think, has been a lot better this split than people are giving him credit for, in my opinion, a top 3 mid laner right now. So Leave and Cream are my honorable mentions, and then my dud of the week is going to obviously go to Juhan. I mean, was this even up for debate for anyone? This is the worst start to an LPL split that I've maybe ever seen out of any player ever. He's truly playing like a tier 3 level player right now, a tier 4 level player right now. I mean, the statistics don't even begin to tell you just how bad it is. If you want to know just how bad the stats are, tune into my cast of the OMG LNG series tomorrow as this video is going live, and you will definitely hear me talk about Juhan and the way that I feel about, the way he's playing right now. But let's just say that if you got through this video, you know that he's been awful. He's the clear-cut choice for dud of the week, and if OMG get relegated, it's almost entirely his fault. So Juhan's dud of the week, and Tarzan is player of the week. But that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're covering every single week of the LPL on this channel, along with me casting it, but we're covering 3 other major regions as well, LCS, LEC, and LCK, every single week. And if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all